this has been an incredibly difficult deal to get across the line, and it strikes me as it's very, very tenuous, and that it could face some severe challenges for this deal to get right through to the end stage, which would be a more positive age of trying to even rebuild Gaza from the devastating attacks it's obviously undergone. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, it is. If you look at how difficult it has been to get to this stage and how many blocks have been put in the way, it's not unreasonable to think that those who have held up a deal in the past for various reasons on each side might be so uncertain about what has been agreed that they would want to pursue their aims and disregard the ceasefire in due course. But balancing that is firstly the incredible weariness of those involved in a conflict, which often leads to the end of the conflict, the horror on both sides, the horror of Israeli families after October the 7th and waiting for the return of their loved ones, the massive destruction in Gaza that has devastated it and killed tens of thousands, the pressure on those who lead in both Israel and amongst the Palestinians is intense to stop what has been happening, return the hostages, end the bombing of Gaza. And those pressures have combined now, after so long, to create the agreement. But those who perpetuated the conflict, kept it going when there was a potential deal on the table, have not gone away.
One of the criticisms being levelled by members of Benjamin Netanyahu's own cabinet, he of course being the Prime Minister of Israel, is that his pledge was he would eradicate Hamas from Gaza. And the argument is that this deal means that won't be the case. Is this a tough pill for the Prime Minister of Israel to swallow? And I suppose, why has he swallowed it? Is it just he knows the population are weary of war?
I'm sure it is a tough realisation for him that the aims he set out at the beginning of the conflict were never going to be realised. Virtually every commentator outside Israel told Prime Minister Netanyahu that his aim of destroying Hamas completely was unlikely, because you could kill a number of those who've been involved in the terrorist attack, and you could kill a number of those who are militants, but you couldn't kill the ideology behind Hamas. And the likelihood of recovering all the hostages by force of arms was also unlikely, and that has proved the case. The majority of hostages that have been freed since October the 7th have been freed by negotiation. And as Secretary of State Blinken said just last week, the United States reckons that as many Hamas new recruits have been collected by Hamas as those who have perished in the conflict. So neither aim was likely.
The hostage deal. Okay. On February the 8th, 2025, El Kalabon basically described the grotesque spectacle of the first hostage exchange. She said, "Today, Israeli hostage Eli Sharabi was returned. Today, Israeli hostage Eli Sharabi was returned. Hamas killed his wife and 2 daughters, pictured below, as well as his brother in captivity who was kidnapped with him, and they also shot and killed his dog. As you can see from Eli's physical health, he almost did not make it also. When they found his murdered wife and daughters, they were huddled in their mother's arms as though she was trying to protect them. She died trying to save them. As Eli is being released, Hamas forces him to tell the world that he is happy to go back to his wife and children whom they had not told that they had killed, as a form of psychological torture, while his abusers parade him on a public stage with a certificate for his time in captivity, and the world looks on indifferent to the sickest, darkest Black Mirror episode of reality. Not only that, but 9 wounded hostages were exchanged for 112 terrorists who had committed at least one or more acts of murder, meaning not only do the hostages have to live with the fact that they were kidnapped and their families were murdered by terrorists, they are forced to serve as the bargaining chip to exchange for the same terrorists that have killed their families and friends. I will never forgive anyone who used the terms resistance or liberation movement within 100 miles of Hamas. There is no equivalent to the evil of radical Islamists in our time. None. If you are so sure you're on the right side of history, explain it to your maker. To those of you who said never again after the Holocaust and wondered what you would have done had you been alive, your silence as Jews emerged from the Auschwitzian terror tunnels is your answer. That was a grim moment. It's like the previous year, there have been victories for Israel. So many kind of glorious victories for Israel to celebrate. You know, there have been glorious victories in this. You know, there was the rescue of the 4 hostages in May last year.
On the morning of June 8th, Israeli commandos made their way into Nusayrat, in central Gaza, to conduct a covert rescue mission. The raid freed 4 hostages and was a critical moment in the now 10-month war, which Israel said it launched in part to rescue more than 200 people abducted by Hamas during their October 7th attack. Prior to this operation, only 3 had been freed by force.
That absolutely brilliant, hostage rescue operation that Owen Jones, of course, whined about because it's like, oh, but 271, some 200 Palestinians were killed in the crossfire during that operation. Were those 4 hostages really worth 200 plus lives? It's like, get fucked, Owen, you piece of shit. You know. You know, when it comes to the hostages, I can't be a hypocrite about it. I was never I was not one of those who held out hope for the hostages. I just had this kind of cold, hard-headed view that if they were being dragged into the Gaza Strip, the Gaza war zone, then they had to be considered expendable, just like the civilian population of Gaza. They were likely to end up as collateral damage in this war, as casualties of war. I didn't see much hope of rescuing them. And I felt the imperative was just to destroy Hamas. And not even stop to think about the hostages. I didn't wear the yellow ribbon for the hostages. I tried my best not to think of them at all, really. I thought what was imperative was destroying Hamas. It was better men than me, like Douglas Murray and Mossab Hassan Youssef, who kept the hostages, who kept up hope, kept on reminding people about the hostages, who kept up, hope of the rest of the, who kept up the name, who kept alive the name of the hostages.
Sir, you say that you use very big terms. How would you then describe the slaughter of 40,000 people? And away from Gaza, I want you to explain to me, how is it that you find it normal and what you expect of a child that is taken and kidnapped from his home, from his family, from the West Bank?
Okay.
Is it normal that you have children being charged with under military law? Is this something you believe is sustainable?
Okay, let me give the final answer to Mossab.
Sure.
Well, are you talking about baby Kfir, whose first birthday was in Hamas captivity? Is this the child you are talking about? Because Israel does not kidnap children.
I'm talking about thousands of children, sir. No,
policy.
They do, sir.
Even there is no such thing as thousands of children. The entire Palestinian prisoners, they are
no
not
such thing
even
as a
in the
child, it
thousands
seems,
to
in
say
your
that.
eye.
Mostly children. And please, when you say war crimes, you're just repeating like a parrot whatever they told you.
I'm not the one who kept the, I didn't keep hope in the return of the hostages at all. Obviously, I would have wanted it to happen, but I decided to be hard-headed about the prospect that it might not happen. The hostages had to be considered expendable in this war, basically. And maybe it helped not to think of them. But like I said, Douglas Murray, Mossab Hassan Youssef, they kept the name of baby Kafir alive and kept up the hope in baby Kafir's rescue. And when there was that operation, that operation in the refugee camps to rescue the 4 hostages, that was a triumphant moment. And it was like, it almost felt like in a narrative sense it was almost building up to a grander victory. And the death of Sinwar was another grand moment of victory. And it felt like there could be no... What obviously Douglas Murray and Mossab Hassan Youssef were keeping alive was the hope that, and what many Israelis were keeping alive was the hope that there could be no better happy ending to this nightmarish war than the rescue of the Bibas babies. Rescue of Kafir and his older brother Ariel Bibas and their mother Shiri Bibas, There could be no better happy ending than rescuing those babies and their mother Shiri and bringing them home, and the nation celebrating and being so overjoyed at the rescue of the babies. That all our hopes were resting on the rescue of those babies, and how wonderful it would be to bring them home and give them a massive, give Kafir Bibas a massive belated birthday party to make up for the one he experienced in captivity. And the thought of, well, these babies are going to be kind of, in the years to come, they would be, these babies would be asked about what it was like in captivity. Do they remember their time in captivity? Do they know that the entire nation was holding their breath in the hope of their rescue? It would have been a lovely happy ending, but it was a happy ending that was not at all to be.
So I just got to my hotel in Toronto and I heard the news about the Bibas babies who have now been confirmed dead. And their dead bodies are going to be returned by Hamas tomorrow. And I know that from here on out, we're going to hear every single excuse in the book that there should have been a ceasefire deal sooner, and there should have been a hostage deal, and there should never have been a war, and Jews should never have returned to the land, and what about the occupation? Everything. Except the one thing that this morally bankrupt world should have said on October 7th, which is that terrorists should not be kidnapping babies. And it is that failure. Just know. It is that abject failure to do the right thing, to say the one thing that needed to be said from the beginning. That is exactly why Hamas has benefited for the past 16 months, and babies have suffered. Because for the past 16 months that you've been watching these protests out there saying, kill the hostages. Hamas, Hamas, we love you. We support your rockets too. Jews, go back to Poland. All of it, all of those 16 months was 16 months that those babies were underground in tunnels relying on you to be their voice. And where were you? Where were you? Where you were was saying, who are we to judge how a people resist? I'll tell you who we are. Who we are is society. We are quite literally the people who judge the standards of violence and morality. That is what we do. But you know what? Based on the past 16 months, maybe you aren't the people to judge. Maybe you are the people to be judged. Because if, as a society, we can't find it in ourselves to say the one thing that counts, which is that terrorists shouldn't be killing babies, and as a result of that failure to say the right thing, these babies, their bodies are coming home dead tomorrow, just know that their blood is not just on the hands of the terrorists that kidnapped them. Their blood is on the hands of a failed society that is against everything except the terrorists that killed them.
You know, it was sickening enough to learn that the Bebas babies were dead. But it wasn't so much the deaths that broke me. It was the parade of their corpses. It was the parade of their coffins to a celebrating crowd of Gazan people, of Gazan families, mothers and children, jubilant at the deaths and saying, you know, it is our victory. They came into Gaza alive and left dead. And they party to Arabic music, dancing on stage like it was disgusting to watch. And something changed with me after that parade of the Bebas babies, after that coffin parade. It changed me to watch that, actually. You know, because I didn't relish this war. I didn't relish what the children in Gaza had to go through in this. And I felt the only thing I could do for them was pray. And pray that they got lucky in this war. They had to take their chances now that Hamas had set this war into motion. And I just had to hope and pray that enough of them survived this hell. and it was going to be miserable and tragic, but as Mossab Hassan Youssef said, because of Hamas's actions, war was now the only way to peace. But when I saw that parade, but after that parade, something changed in me, and because to me that parade was the day I lost my last shred of sympathy for the Palestinians, certainly for the Gazan people, because it was such a demonic sight that I wasn't expecting it. I wasn't expecting Hamas to still have this level of support by the Gazan people and the Gazan families after the bombardment that the Gaza Strip had suffered. And yet here they were, triumphant over what? Over the murder of Jewish babies.
What I'm about to show you contains powerful pictures, powerful videos, and it is quite simply one of the worst things I have ever seen in my life. And if you're anything like me, you will struggle to put into words your emotions at seeing what I'm about to show you. But I have done my best. Not a single Gazan so-called refugee should ever set foot in Britain. Why? Just look at this. Today, Hamas dug up and paraded the coffins carrying the bodies of Jewish babies and their mother. How did these poor, oppressed, lovely Palestinians react? Those barbarians cheered. They celebrated the fact that Hamas murdered Jewish babies. And look at this.
They also downplay October 7th, like that shitty scumbag actress Dawn French. She had to apologise for it.
That was outrageous.
Yeah, she said, "Oh, they did a bad thing on October, just a little bad thing on October 7th." I watched a Hamas member after shooting a teenage girl, Jewish, in her home in the gut. He shot her in the gut, and she's writhing on the floor, bleeding out. And then the parents, and he's like, "No." He made the son, the mum, and the dad sit next to it. He started on their Facebook Live, started filming the girl as she's bleeding from her gut. He shot her in the gut with an AK-47. And then the son is screaming to his parents, and the dad, and the mum's destroyed, but the dad's trying to stay strong for his son, like, "Son, we're going to get through this." And he's watching his daughter bleed out by Hamas. And they then all got killed on Facebook Live. They just got shot in the face. Another one I saw was Hamas filming on their GoPros. They got into another house in the kibbutz, and there was one of the boys was like 8, his brother was like 10. One of them was missing an arm from getting blown off by a grenade from Hamas, and he was there, the 10-year-old boy, holding his brother's arm. And the little boy, he was trying to tell his brother that it wasn't real. Like, "Don't worry, this is a dream, it's not real." And there's a fucking Hamas guy filming those little kids. And then these people, sorry, forgive me, these fucking people, they try and downplay that like it's a small thing. I watched with my own eyes that mother, Shiri Bibas. She knew what was going to happen to her little. One of them was 18 months old. The other one was 3 years old. Little ginger kids. And the two Hamas guys, balaclavas, guns, they're like parading the babies, and the mother's watching, and she knows what's going to happen to them. And like, this isn't shit from like the medieval period. This is people doing it on Facebook Live, like real. And then for people to have the audacity to go out supporting that every week on British streets, for the government to tolerate it, for the police to facilitate their protest. All I see, Liam, on the streets of Manchester or Leeds or London, where I see these ghouls, is a desire for revenge, retribution, to terrify, to scare. It's why they come out dressing like suicide bombers. It's why they dress like Hamas, the very fuckers who took those babies and tortured them. And sorry to finish that story with the 2 ginger children. Hamas gave them back to Israel. And they said, oh, they died in an Israeli airstrike. The forensic scientists in Israel, which are probably some of the best on the planet, discovered that the 2 little babies were strangled to death, and then their bodies were smashed up with a sledgehammer to make it look like an airstrike. But they could tell the constriction of the neck on the little babies.
It's like, this is such an irredeemable culture. What I'm looking at is just a society beyond saving, and that's kind of the thing. I think that's why, if I had it in mind that I was kind of having to defend Israel while I was on trial, this was the moment for me where I decided, you know what, the trial's over. There's no case here. Case dismissed. Israel is completely exonerated of all charges. This is a sham case. And it's like, from that point on, it was a case of, it's not that Israel hadn't done enough to save, to prevent the deaths of civilians in Gaza. It was more that this society was just beyond saving. It was beyond redeeming. Completely beyond redeeming. This was an evil society I was looking at. It was an irredeemable society I was looking at. It was the true society of demonic baby killers I was looking at. Moreover, what I was looking at in that footage was in no way at all any survivors of a genocide, or any victims of a genocide, or survivors of a genocide. This was not how survivors of a genocide, this was not how victims of a genocide look. This is not how victims of a genocide have ever acted.
I think today the illusion died. It's something that I've never bought into, by the way, but today, for me, the total illusion died. That the Palestinian people, the people in Gaza, are this brutally oppressed group of people who hate Hamas and who are being forced to live under them. Well, I tell you what, how many tens of thousands turned out on the streets today, Matthew, to wave to and cheer at the bodies of Israeli babies in their coffins?
And at first I saw hope that maybe that's what had happened, that this would be the tide-turning moment. The moment that turned the tide. Where maybe the narrative on this war would change. And people would kind of question whether the Palestinians were worth their sympathy or not. I began to hope this would be the turning of the tide, where people would wake up to, the tide would turn. Like, the tide was against Israel up to this point, but I thought maybe this is the tide turning moment where people are going to say, hang on a minute. We've been had, haven't we? I'm not going to sympathise with this. I thought that would be the tide-turning moment, where people realised which side in this war was actually the true, brutal, cold-blooded baby killers. You know, quite often in my Facebook feed, quite often in my Facebook feed, there would appear, charity ads for Gaza. Ads in which, and they'd appear on YouTube, ads as well. Ads about, let's feed Gaza, let's feed the people of Gaza, let's help the children of Gaza. They appeared very often on my Facebook feed. Asking for charity donations to help feed the starving Gaza, help aid workers, feed the starving children in Gaza. And, in the first few months of the war, I actually donated to them quite a few times. I thought, why not? I want this, if I can do a little bit to help the innocents in Gaza survive this war, and be well fed as best as possible. If I can play some, I felt okay. That's the right thing to do. I stopped donating, however, after the South Africa trial, where it turned out that. Where it was revealed how complicit UNRWA had been in the October the 7th massacre, and how complicit they'd been in harbouring and sheltering Hamas, and in abusing UN facilities. And that was the point where my purse shut, and I said, I'm donating nothing anymore. I don't know where my money's going. I thought I was donating it to help the children in this terrible humanitarian crisis. For all I know, I'm actually funding UNRWA, for all I know, my money would actually be funding UNRWA, who helped start the war and cause the humanitarian crisis in the first place. They're not getting my money. I don't know where my money's going anymore, so I'm not going to donate. Which I felt guilty about to a degree, but it seemed like the only sane thing to do. But the ads would still appear in my feed, all the same. And I responded, but the thing is, I did notice quite a few comments this time underneath the charity ad saying, I'm donating nothing now. And they mentioned the death at the parade of the coffins of the Bebas babies. Let's see. Someone wrote under the Medical Aid for Palestinians, Medical Aid for Palestine post. I've read about the appalling murders of the baby Kafir Bebas and his toddler brother Ariel. They were strangled and their poor little bodies were mutilated to make it seem like they had been killed by Israeli bombing. The forensic results have been sent to experts in other countries for verification. Their children's mother, Shiri Bebas, was not returned on Thursday as agreed, but an unknown body was in the coffin instead, confirmed by DNA tests. A body believed to be Shiri's was sent over by Hamas yesterday and is undergoing forensic examination today. I have seen footage of the coffin handover scene and it is disgusting. A huge, well-fed crowd had gathered by that disgusting propaganda stage, filming the scene with their mobile phones. They were cheering excitedly and Arabic music was playing. A woman kissed the ground and thanked Allah for victory. Not the dignified handover from Hamas that the Red Cross requested. I will never support these depraved, hate-filled barbarians. Hamas must be replaced and the people somehow de-radicalized. And the tone just seemed to be, I'm donating nothing now. They've lost my sympathy. And it was kind of, it's like, it was the same place the sympathy had first come from. The mothers, the kind of the whole thing about, usually the cause has a way, the Palestine cause has a way of appealing to, people across the board. It appeals to middle-aged mums a lot because it obviously touches on that kind of you know, seeing Palestinian children killed, it's like it triggers the protective mother approach, the kind of, you know, wanting to protect all the world's children. How horrible it would be if these were my children. You know, children are the most beautiful thing, and it's nothing more heartbreaking than seeing the death of children. But it was like, now it was maybe seeing that demographic saying, well, now I've seen Israeli children returned in coffins and a crowd celebrating. I cannot understand a culture like that. That repulses me. And, you know, yeah, here's a post on the British Red Cross, British Red Cross charity thing, posted 8th of the 3rd, 2025. Poster said, oh, this is a man saying this now, no mention of the Red Star ambulances. You have cancelled yourselves by ignoring the Israeli version, yet acknowledging the Palestinian ones. You ignored the plight of the He said, you've ignored the plight of the Israeli hostages. How dare you? For years I rated you, praised what you did, and thought that you performed an important righteous role in society. Now the true face of the Red Cross has been revealed. A racist, anti-Semitic, cowardly, biased, extremely flawed organisation without integrity, compassion and soul. You have done nothing to aid these fellow human beings in their plight and fight for survival in captivity. On the day that the Bibas brothers were returned to Israel, you reported on a situation in the Congo and didn't mention it once. Your silence has been deafening. Why have you not asked to check up on the Israeli hostages, checking up on their welfare? Where were the health checks? A number of the hostages were seriously injured when kidnapped, yet you didn't do anything to help them. You have participated in the pantomimes that take place when the hostages have been released. Shame on you. I am shocked, yet strangely not surprised, that you worded your post including the Red Cross and the Red Crescent, yet ignored the Red Star. Are you seriously going to continue to ignore Israel and the Israelis? Did the 7th of October mean nothing to you? Do you not consider the Jewish people as human? Since when did your agency lose all notion of compassion? After this conflict is over, if indeed it is ever resolved, there must certainly be a day of reckoning for you. People will have the time to reflect on your role in the proceedings and your lack of action in that moment, and you will lose a significant amount of support. I personally will never support you again. There is not a word I can muster that would communicate the level of disgust that I feel for your actions so far. Shame on you. You know, I'm done, basically. And so I was hopeful. I thought maybe this is it. This is, you know, this is the end of any need to defend Israel anymore. It's case closed. What a rotten culture Israel has had to deal with here. And I thought, well, that's it. You know, it's, you know, that's the change. Times have changed, basically. You know, I thought that was it. The end of any sympathy for the Palestinian cause was gone now, and sadly it was at the point where it could only end if sympathy for the Palestinians died. Sympathy for the Palestinian cause had to die, basically. There was no other way. There was no other hope, really. There was no other way out of this madness. What I didn't understand, however, is that the zeitgeist in the West was just... the anti-Israel zeitgeist in the West was just not going to let that happen. Our media class was not going to let that happen. Our media class of, you know, virtue-singing twats, you know, in music and media and TV and film. They'd stuck firmly to the right-on pro-Palestine message. You know, it was the fashionable view for the media class to hold. And they weren't going to change their minds now, and they weren't going to let the rest of the society change their minds either. It was the zeitgeist. First, there was a huge controversy about Kneecap, the rap, the Irish hip hop group, the rap group, the kind of rap group that really proved the old adage about how most rap is just missing the sea.
So the Belfast rap trio Kneecap are being investigated by counter-terror police, and there are calls from figures in the UK government to have them pulled from Glastonbury. This is in response to a number of comments that have been essentially footage coming out of their gigs where they've said things like "Up Hamas, up Hezbollah, the only good Tory is a dead Tory," and "Kill your local MP." Tom, I mean, obviously these are not big or clever statements, but it does seem to me that we get into this trap in the UK in particular, where if someone says something vaguely distasteful or irritating, then the immediate response is that the police must get involved, or their livelihoods must be destroyed. What have you made of this row?
I think at this point, everyone just needs to suspend anything that they feel about this odious, quite embarrassing rap trio, and just recognise what is going on here. You've got the counter-terror police investigating rappers for being offensive. You've got the Labour government demanding, in the form of Dan Jarvis, that they be purged from the Glastonbury Festival lineup. This has clearly gone too far now. Like, this is not purely about remonstrating with a few idiots saying repulsive things purposefully. This is now really breached into a serious free speech story, which if anyone wants to be consistent on this, needs to be very clear that we can't accept something like this happening. It should go without saying that Kneecap are loathsome in so many respects. They're also just incredibly cringe. That's one of the reasons why I find this clampdown kind of particularly irksome, is the fact that it plays to their grift. It plays to their shtick.
No. The Kneecap were this Irish band that basically spoke very much to the Irish zeitgeist at that time, which was very anti-Israel. I mean, Ireland is so poisonously anti-Israel and anti-Semitic that eventually Israel kind of cut off diplomatic ties with them, because they realised, that across the board the government is rife with anti-Israel sentiment, and President Higgins is just a vile, nasty creep of a man. And his vitriol against Israel it's not even coherent. It's like, there was a particular statement he made about Israel, and saying, I bet they'd love to conquer territory in Egypt and have settlements there. It's like, where the hell are you getting that from? This is just baseless smears. It's got nothing to do with the war aims here. You're spreading lies. It's despicable, really. And Ireland has produced Kneecap, who are a hip-hop band who have, waved the Hezbollah flag, Hezbollah flag, and yelled "Up Hamas, up Hezbollah," and and they say they want to raise the plight, raise awareness of the plight of the Palestinians. And it's like, again, it's like with the death of the Bebas babies, the whole sham of, these people care so much about dead children, except when they're championing Hamas and Hezbollah, who are also child killers, who are themselves child killers. Like, Hamas murdered the Bebas babies. Hezbollah killed 12 Druze children in the north in one of their rocket attacks.
Of course, the law is the law. We do have laws in this country which are against glorifying terrorist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. There have been people who have been locked up in this country for far less than praising Islamo-fascist jihadists and calling for MPs to be killed. At the same time, I think the answer to two-tier speech policing is not to say we should, enforce the speech codes more evenly, that we should double down on the bad laws that we currently have. No one is buying it really when NECAP put out their statement earlier this week saying we've never supported Hamas or Hezbollah, even though they've said up Hamas and up Hezbollah and even posed with Hassan Nasrallah's writings.
And there was a chant
off stage.
Yeah, and there was a chant at one of their gigs that was like, ooh, Hezbollah. Yeah.
But NECAP got in trouble for for glorifying a prescribed terrorist group, and also for lyrics about kill your local Tory MP, kill your local MP, and there were moves in Britain to try and ban them from Britain, certainly to try and get them removed from particular kind of some of their performances, their tour dates in Britain, and to try to remove them from Glastonbury. And it was then that a coalition of artists, a coalition of singers, including old school singers like Paul Weller, Annie Lennox, Shirley Manson, singers who I used to kind of like, who I actually kind of used to like, but they signed this petition in support of NECAP's artistic expression, and turn this whole thing into a free speech issue, as if suddenly the left was suddenly free speech, pro free speech again, and as if they hadn't tried to ban Eden Golan and Yuval Raphael from Eurovision, or terrorize them out of Eurovision for that matter.
So the trial of Makara from NECAP has been suspended. People may know the Irish rap trio. One of them has been charged with essentially giving succor to terrorism. It's alleged that he flew a Hezbollah banner at one of his gigs. Tom, this is the best thing to happen to NECAP, isn't it? The fact that, they've never get publicity like this otherwise.
I mean, it's very rare that you could say that being brought up on terror charges is the best thing that could ever happen to someone. But I think in this case, that's 100% true. Obviously, this is, it goes without saying, outrageous where freedom of speech is concerned, being these outrageous, provocative, Israelophobic rappers, them doing these things to get a rise out of people. It is despicable when you're waving around the banner of an anti-Semitic terror army who have been, pummeling Israel for so many years. But at the same time, to suggest that this is some sort of involvement in terrorism or direct incitement to violence when the audience they're performing this to probably have never thrown a punch, let alone thrown any munitions, seems to me a bit ridiculous. And obviously, they should not have been hauled up on charges for this. They shouldn't have been investigated. State in which you've got the counter-terror police investigating rappers is clearly not in a very good state where freedom of speech is concerned. All that being said, it's been a perfect example, hasn't it, of the way in which censorship in certain circumstances can play so perfectly into the target's hands. If anyone saw the scenes outside of Westminster Magistrates Court this week, where you had hundreds of people gathering, waving placards or wearing their kind of trademark NECAP balaclavas, which look a lot more like kind of tea cozies, really, but not as menacing as maybe they thought. It's allowed them to pose as they've wanted to pose throughout their short career as sort of radicals. They could originally burst onto the scene, titillating the English middle classes with IRA slogans, and now they've moved quite naturally into kind of anti-Israel bigotry. So it's one of those things where they wanted to pose as incredibly edgy, as a threat to the British establishment, and so on and so forth. And even though they're not, by any stretch of the imagination, it's a kind of character act cosplaying kind of exercise that they're involved in. It's fed into that narrative absolutely beautifully. So I wish that far fewer people took this ban seriously, much less the counter-terror police.
It's this massive show of solidarity with NECAP. And that kind of became the story about, Britain's Zionist ambitions to try and bury the very sympathetic voices to Palestine. Glorifying Hamas after what they did to the Bebas babies. I just felt so sick at that. And the worst was when I saw kind of, music scene activists saying, sending a letter to Glastonbury saying, if you If you capitulate to the demands to remove kneecap, you will be faced with the biggest boycott you have ever known. And by all accounts, Glastonbury blinked and said, okay. Glastonbury were petitioned by artists saying, no, you better keep kneecap. Because this is just how right on the music industry is. How its artists is expected to have the right on opinions. And it was kind of, I was realizing this zeitgeist, it's not dying. This anti-Israel zeitgeist, it's not dying. It's becoming more and more. This anti-Israel sentiment, it's not dying away. It's becoming more and more the inescapable zeitgeist now. Nothing matters. Nothing's changing this. Bloody hell, the death of 2 Jewish babies in coffins was not enough to change this. Nothing will be. And I thought it was like I was starting to lose hope and realizing that there's no fighting through the truth anymore. Fighting through for the truth anymore. And then far more unforgivably, bloody that twat Louis Theroux got involved, and he released this new documentary of his called The Settlers.
The violence committed by some settlers is often justified by them as a response to violence they experience from Palestinians, which is much less frequent.
Settlers do not wake up in the morning or do not go wait for sundown to attack. No, 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 no. Why should we wake up in the morning and think about violence? Why? Our life is good.
Because you want the Palestinians to leave.
No, 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 no.
You've said so.
I said that what is on my mind all the time is how to bring more people to settle the land. This is a new development by Jews. This is Har Bracha. This is Itzhar. Here we can develop, here we cannot develop. I never think in terms of, I know this is beta.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think about beta.
Why not?
Because I think about, I'm a Jew.
The people.
I'm a settler.
The people.
I'm a human being.
Yes, you are. So are they.
So I do not think about this.
You're thinking about tribalism, thinking of your own people to the exclusion. It would be understandable to think of your own people or your own children first, but to think about other people, other children, not at all, that seems sociopathic.
And Louis Theroux came up with his documentary, The Settlers. And clips from it were going viral online, clips of, because he interviewed a few kind of Israeli settlers in the West Bank. This old woman, Daniela Weiss, who was kind of head of the Zionist settler movement. And I was just disgusted that he was putting out a documentary like this. That at no point asked, what was the impact of the murder of the Bibas babies on the Israeli society. No, let's make it about how the Israeli settlers are the problem. Because sure, that going to Gaza to speak to Hamas would be far too brave for him. The thing is, I decided, well, if that's the kind of cowardice he's engaged in, this is kind of the, jumping on the bandwagon, keeping this fucking anti-Israel sentiment in the air, and completely whitewashing Hamas's part in any of this. It's like, well, how brave of you to interview some grandmother in Israel, in the West Bank, some ultra-religious, ultra-religious grandma in the West Bank, and make her the issue with Israel, and make her the issue with the Israel-Palestine conflict. Yeah, Yeah. Can't imagine you have the courage to go speak to a mass, because they'd probably kind of lose their patience with you and your stupid, insipid questions very quickly and behead you on the spot. You fucking twat. You insipid twat. And I could see it kind of, gaining traction on Twitter, and people saying, listen to how demonic, these settlers are, these Jew rat pigs, the usual kind of, oh, but we're not anti-Semitic. And Hitler didn't do enough. The fucking filth you read on Twitter is just unbelievable. It's like I was reading. This is getting worse. There's no escaping this anymore. This fucking poison online. It's just, we're being overwhelmed by this shit now. I mean, I have watched documentaries that tell the Palestinian side of the story. I didn't, while in the course of making these videos, sometimes I felt a need to actually do as much kind of, research as possible. And, that it has involved reading books, it's involved watching documentaries, it's involved kind of, getting a fuller impression of the conflict and what it's like to live through. And, I have seen documentaries, like there's a few documentaries done by Sandra Jordan back in the early 2000s, that she did for Dispatches and for Unreported World, Channel 4's Unreported World. She'd actually go into the Gaza Strip and tell the story of the Palestinian people there. And, she did some great documentary work in the Gaza Strip. And, I mean, she is to this day the one pro-Palestine journalist out there I still have respect for. I mean, she's since retired, so I don't know what her opinion on the current situation is. I can't imagine she approves of, well, either side in it, really. I can't imagine she approves of Hamas. I can't imagine she approves of Israel and Netanyahu. But, and I felt, I had an obligation to be truthful in my video making and be informed in my video making, and, to know the truth I was telling, basically. To know the truth I was telling as best as possible and as intimately as possible, because, I mean, Sandra Jordan's documentaries were actually very good at putting you in the Gaza environment, back in 2001, and what it was like to live under the Israeli occupation and the ongoing infighting between Hamas and Fatah. And so normally I don't boycott kind of, pro-Palestine documentaries, but this time it was like, I'm boycotting this shit. What a disgusting thing to put out right now. What a disgusting, inflammatory thing to put out right now. Just to further dehumanize the Israeli people and dehumanize, the fact that these are people who love their children and are committed to protecting their children from Hamas butchers who want to kill their children. And being told they have to care about their enemy's children more than their own. And I was like, this is, so I was in a position to boycott this shite. But it just seemed to be getting worse and worse all the time. And, what seemed to be the worst nadir of it was Eurovision. Which, really saw the Palestine activists at their worst, because Yuval Raphael had entered the Eurovision contest, and she had actually been at the Nova Festival when Hamas attacked. She had basically she'd had to play dead. She'd had to smear her face and body with the blood of one of the victims of the massacre and lie down and pretend to be among the dead. You know, so she smeared over her face to make it look like she'd been kind of bled to death as well. And basically, the activists were out to cancel her performance, and a particular member and some scumbag from Youth Demand actually tried to rush the stage with the intention of pouring red paint on her during her performance. Fortunately, security were very, very quick to stop him and restrain him, and apparently, you know, there was footage of him being a bit roughed up. Not nearly as much as that scumbag deserved. But you know, Owen Jones was like pearl clutching about, this guy was only trying to raise the plight of Palestine, and the way he was roughed up by these Zionist security guards, these pro-genocide security guards. Yeah, fuck off, Owen. Fucking die of your daddy's cancer, you prick. You know, Owen Jones is just a sickening, repulsive scrote of a man. He's just the most disgusting pro-Palestine journalist we have here in Britain. I mean, who the bloody hell goes to Glastonbury to see that prick? But
The thing with these idiots from Youth Action, I think it's a 27-year-old and a 22-year-old. Have we got a clip of this? Can we show that? Yes. Right,
yeah, so they weren't arrested, they were detained by organisers at the time and then released, and then a Basel police spokesperson said it's up to the organiser now if they want to press charges about this.
You know what annoys me about this, though, Alex, is Yuval's in her 20s. She's a survivor of the Nova Music Festival on October the 7th. She hid under the bodies of her mates for 8 hours. What she's achieved is amazing. Ignore the politics. And these idiots in their 20s behaving like that to this woman that survived all those horrors, they should hang their head in shame.
There's a sort of, in my personal opinion, a real lack of sort of, we don't look at the human anymore. We just completely... We grab a cause and we run for it. This is her performing last night as well. And this song was inspired by those horrific events on October 7th.
I felt a sense of real anger at that. I thought, OK, now you're crossing a line. Now I'm no longer... up until that point, I think I had kind of... Because my mum was on the march and because, you know, my neighbour across the street is on the march, I did have that kind of neutral view of, well, you know, if they're on the march, live and let live. You know, allow them to march, allow them to express their positions, you know, allow them to, you know, voice their cause. This was the point where I thought, enough of this. Why aren't we pouring red paint over those scumbags? Why aren't we attacking them on the street and saying, get the fuck off our streets now? We're sick of you terrorists supporting filth. Well, the reason is because they're protected by the police. The police are committed to protecting the marchers. And no one wants to even bother getting into altercations with the marchers. The marchers are allowed to rule the streets, essentially.
It is amazing, isn't it? I think it's a bit like, on a macro scale, what we've been seeing to our astonishment on the streets of London and elsewhere in these terrible pro-Hamas demonstrations ever since October 7. That you have a situation in which pro-Israel people who are standing peacefully with a placard saying Hamas is a terrorist entity, whatever, are basically hustled away, threatened with arrest, and treated as criminals. Whereas the people who are prancing around, shrieking death to Jews, genocide now, intifada now, globalize the intifada, destroy Israel, and so on, are shielded. And the perverse reasoning is this, that from the police point of view, their purpose is to prevent public disorder, public violence. the people who are going to be violent are the people who are the pro-Hamas people. The people who are never going to be violent are the pro-Israel people. The pro-Hamas people are going to become violent by being provoked by the people who are doing nothing wrong. So it's the people who do nothing wrong who have to be treated as criminals in order to stop the violence by the people who must therefore be effectively shielded. And it's a pretty well the same sort of thing, I think, with Israel. The thinking goes, if Israel wasn't there, there wouldn't be a problem. And I think that's really at the back and even the front of the minds of many in the West and Western leaders, that Israel's very presence is the provocation.
But there seemed to be some light at the end of the tunnel when the results came in. It seemed that Yuval Raphael had won the popular vote. You know, and I'd helped in that. Of course, I'd given all my votes to Israel. And it seemed to be sending the message of the silent majority in Britain and the West were far more pro-Israel than the activists wanted us to believe. Or certainly that, I mean, I kind of lost hope in that. I thought, no, this isn't necessarily a sign of that. What it's a sign of is that regardless of the politics of this, most people in Britain are decent enough to not like bullies, and to know that whatever the actions of the Israeli government, you know, Yuval Raphael is just a young singer who wants to entertain a crowd, and no one likes seeing the deranged way she's been bullied and harassed by these creepy, stalkerish activists. But that seemed to be the hope, obviously. Now, so, you know, this documentary about the settlers came out, and then Israel was hit by a number of firestorms, you know, kind of bushfires, and that, much like the California bushfires, they got out of control very quickly, and there's since been some in Turkey as well. And social media was full of, you know, Twitter was full of pro-Palestine activists gloating, yes, burn that hellish colony to the ground. Yeah. I thought they wanted to save Palestine. I thought they believed that Israel was originally Palestine and they wanted to save Palestine. You know, and I thought they cared about, you know, the families caught up in the war being terrorized. It's never really about that in the end, is it? So the ceasefire broke, but anyway, in terms of Israel and Gaza, the ceasefire broke down. I don't know why. I don't particularly care why either. Seemed the Hamas had not agreed to uphold its end of the hostage deal, and so Israel decided that it was going to, you know, the fact that Trump was now in the White House and he was willing to give Israel a green light to do the kind of things that Biden wouldn't. Israel finally decided to actually take a hard line on the aid coming into Gaza. Now, it's a bit confused. There are those who insist that Israel was just cutting off all aid to Gaza and has only recently started to allow an aid corridor in under international pressure. Others have argued that actually what Israel needed to do was set up a more limited aid corridor that completely cut the UN out of things and therefore would ensure that none of the aid being brought in would go to Hamas.
950 trucks are on the Gaza side waiting to be delivered. And the reason they haven't been delivered is because the UN isn't distributing. Why is the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation the only one that's moving these trucks? And in the press conference earlier today with the IDF, they said that the problem, or one of the problems, was that the UN had requested and the World Food Program had requested that Hamas accompany these trucks instead of the IDF, which actually did offer. In addition to that, the GHF offered to help them with security measures because of the situation in Gaza, because it is dire, and the UN refused. So when we talk about starvation, I don't know how you can honestly say that there is any kind of intentional starvation
Well, let me explain.
Currently, as I say this, 950 trucks on the Gaza side that are not being distributed.
Okay.
It's not Israel.
Let me explain. First of all, Israel, as you know, operated a 3-month blockade. That is actually, in many people's eyes, a war crime. But aside from that, more than 100 aid agencies have now warned that mass starvation, their words, is spreading across Gaza. They've accused Israel of not allowing food inside the Strip to be distributed. The Hamas-run
But this
health...
is patently
Okay,
false. There's
wait a minute.
no restriction.
Okay, so you're saying 100 aid agencies are lying. Okay. Then the Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza...
Yes, when it comes to allowing aid, there is no limitation. There is none.
The health ministry, which is Hamas-run in Gaza, says that 10 people have died of malnutrition in the last 24 hours alone. We're seeing a lot of images coming out of Gaza now of utterly emaciated children and adults, right? There's clear starvation going on here. And just on a human level, to deny what we're seeing with our own eyes seems to me an utterly futile exercise by anyone on the pro-Israeli side.
I agree with you. I am not denying that there's starvation in Gaza. I'm not denying there's immense suffering.
Right.
I'm denying that it's Israel who's responsible.
And I don't particularly care either way. I have no sympathy for the Gazans anymore. And, you know, it's been over a year. You know, the Gazans have had over a year to return the hostages, and they're still clinging on to them. Hamas is still clinging on to the hostages. And Israel is expected to still provide aid to the Gaza Strip. The Gazan people have clung onto the hostages and not returned them. Why the bloody hell should Israel be providing aid when Hamas is not giving back the hostages? You know, I just had enough, and then of course some of the clips and images came out of Gaza of, well, what might have been clips from Israel, and some of them might have been clips of children starving in Gaza. Mixed in with them were probably a number of leached footage and clips from Syria 3 or 4 years ago, recycled to look like it was about the Gaza situation. I think there was a Syrian girl, a blonde little girl who was, you know, you could see kind of, you know, the rib cage indented on her skin because she'd been starving that much. And then I heard kind of, you know, there were some accounts suggesting that there were some accounts saying no, that this is actually from Syria back in 2018. And it was like, I thought I have no sympathy anymore, and I thought I could approach this, you know, much more heartlessly now. Not hard-headedly, heartlessly. And just say, my sympathy is done. You've exhausted my last sympathy. And I was wrong. I still would see this footage of you know, starving children, and I would feel sad, and I would wish someone would provide them the food they needed. It's hard to watch people deteriorating away like that, especially children, because, you know, your instinct is they could still be saved. They shouldn't have to live like this. But at the back of my mind, there was always the thought of, this is Hamas's fault. They are starving because of Hamas's fucking horrific policies, you know, utterly cavalier policies, utterly also the capricious policies of just prioritizing taunting the Jews and killing the Jews over everything else, even over their own starving people. And I thought this is just an unfortunate feature of living under Hamas government. So if you want this to change, the people should rise up and overthrow Hamas. But if they're not going to do that, then what the bloody hell can I do about it? You know?
And when you're talking about dealing with a terrorist organization like Hamas that has been proven and has admitted themselves to hiding and embedding in civilian infrastructure, that is a reasonable explanation for the reason why there are civilian casualties in war. In fact, those targets aren't even illegal, much less genocide, when it comes to airstrikes, because they lose their legal status of a protected status as civilian infrastructure when they're used by terrorist organizations like Hamas. So you cannot say that that's intentional. And there has not been a demonstrated pattern of a desire to eradicate the Palestinian people or eradicate a Palestinian state. If there was, you would have seen a war in the West Bank as well. And in addition to that, I just want to point out once more that this wasn't a war that Israel started. This wasn't a premeditated plan in order to reduce the population of Gaza or to erase the Palestinian people from the Gaza Strip. Evacuation notices have been used in Yemen. They've been used in Iran. They've been used in Lebanon. They've been used in Gaza. In none of those places are we talking about ethnic cleansing or genocide. Only when it comes to dealing with the Gaza Strip, because it is an untenable situation, but not as a result of the state of Israel, as a result of Hamas.
It was kind of sad, but it obviously triggered a lot of it re-triggered, you know, the whole, you know, anti-Israel crowd. And then my government, the Keir Starmer government, did the ultimate and basically demonstrated that, you know, Yardina Schwartz's book, Ghosts of a Holy War, perfectly demonstrates how the Jews were screwed over by the British during the Mandate period. You know, because the British wanted to appease the Arabs. They wanted to appease the Muslim bloc in Palestine, to the point they were willing to throw the Jews under the bus. Some things never change, do they? And let's see, what did they put out? And okay, 19th of May. Joint statement from the leaders of the United Kingdom, France and Canada on the situation in Gaza and the West Bank. From Prime Minister's Office, 10 Downing Street, the Right Honourable Sir Keir Starmer, fuck you, KCB, KCMP. Published 19th of May 2025. He says, "We strongly oppose the expansion of Israel's military operations in Gaza. The level of human suffering in Gaza is intolerable. Yesterday's announcement that Israel will allow a basic quantity of food into Gaza is wholly inadequate." Oh, fuck off. "We call on the Israeli government to stop its military operations in Gaza and immediately allow humanitarian aid to enter Gaza. This must include engaging with the UN." Yeah, it must involve engaging with the fucking child molesting UN. Fucking United Nations. The United Rogue Criminal Shithole that shouldn't be nations, more like. "To ensure return to delivery of aid in line with humanitarian principles." You're talking about the fucking UN, the fucking child molesting UN. Fuck off. We know that basically the UN is complicit with Hamas and that aid is going to get transferred to Hamas in no time. "We call on Hamas to release immediately the remaining hostages they have so cruelly held since 7th of October 2023. Oh, you put that little token in. Why wasn't that the entire statement? That little bit should have been the entire statement. No more than that. The Israeli government's denial of essential humanitarian assistance to the civilian population is unacceptable and risks breaching international humanitarian law. We condemn the abhorrent language used recently by members of the Israeli government. Abhorrent language? Oh, are you going to go send the British police over to arrest them for some naughty tweets, are you? And lock them in jail for 31 months? You fucking pricks. What about the abhorrent language used by Hamas? You know, the bushes and rocks will speak, and they will say, "Oh, Muslim, there's a Jew behind me. Come kill him." Is that not abhorrent language? Fuck off. You know, as members of the Israeli government threatening that in their despair at the destruction of Gaza, civilians will start to relocate. That'll be the best thing possible. Send them all to fucking Libya. Permanent forced displacement is a breach of international humanitarian law. Oh, so they should... wait a minute. So they're in this unlivable war zone, but they should stay there. So basically the Gazans should remain in an unlivable war zone. Why the bloody hell should Israel have to bloody coexist with a bunch of baby-killing savages like the Palestinians? Whose only mission is to kidnap Israeli babies, strangle them and return them in coffins, you fucking pricks. Israel suffered a heinous attack on October the 7th. We have always supported Israel's right to defend Israelis against terrorism. Yeah, well, Yardina Schwartz's book says otherwise. Fuck off. But this escalation is wholly disproportionate. No, it's not. It's not disproportionate. The Gazan people have had a whole year have had a whole 2 years nearly. Have had near 2 years to return the hostages, and they return fucking babies in coffins. Israel is absolutely right to want its hostages back. Safely. Now, if that means starving Hamas out, then that's what has to be done. It's been 2 years. We will not stand by while the Netanyahu government pursues these egregious actions. If Israel does not cease the renewed military offensive and lift its restriction on humanitarian aid, we will take further concrete actions in response. Go fuck yourself. We oppose any attempt to expand settlements in the West Bank. Oh, I get it. So Labour have recently watched The Settlers, that shit Louis Theroux documentary, and said, "Oh my God, did you see this on TV the other day? We've got to make a Labour policy out of this." Israel must halt settlements which are illegal and undermine the viability of a Palestinian state. Fuck a Palestinian state. Those scumbags should be denied ever having their own Palestinian state. And the security of both Israelis and Palestinians. We will not hesitate to take further action, including targeted sanctions. Get fucked. We strongly support the efforts led by the United States, Qatar and Egypt to secure an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Oh yeah, Qatar, who fucking who harboured the Hamas leadership and wouldn't fucking give them up. Wouldn't kick them out. Oh, and Egypt, who sealed its borders to the Gaza Strip to ensure the death toll in this war was far higher. Yeah. They made such a beautiful contribution to this humanitarian crisis, but it's all Israel. But Israel's part is unforgivable. Fuck off. It is a ceasefire, the release of all remaining hostages, and a long-term political solution that offers the best hope of ending the agony of the hostages and their families, alleviating the suffering of civilians in Gaza, ending Hamas's control of Gaza. What? Capitulating to Hamas is the best way of ending their control of Gaza? Fuck off. And achieving a pathway to a two-state solution. Fuck off with this two-state solution bullshit. Consistent with the goals of the 18th of June conference in New York, these negotiations need to succeed, and we must all work towards the implementation of a two-state solution, which is the only way to bring long-lasting peace and security that both the Israelis and Palestinians deserve. The Palestinians deserve fuck all. And ensure long-term stability in the region. We will continue to work with the Palestinian Authority, who still have their fucking paid for slay policy, enact that rewards fucking terrorists who kill Jews. Yeah, they're such, decent and honourable partners for peace, aren't they? Get fucked. Regional partners, Israel and the United States, to finalise consensus on arrangements for Gaza's future, building on the Arab plan. We affirm the important role of the high-level two-state solution conference at the UN in June in building international consensus around this aim. I want the UN to be fucking abolished and consigned to the dustbin of history. Oh, and we are committed to recognising a Palestinian state as a reward for the October the 7th atrocities, you fucking prick. As a contribution to achieving a two-state solution, and are prepared to work with others to this end. Get fucked, Keir Starmer, you prick. But I was just disgusted when I read this, and I thought, how you've disgraced a country. It's like, this is not going to make the leftists like you any more than they do, Keir. They already think you're a Zionist who's influenced by your Jewish wife to be a Zionist. This isn't going to win them back. All you've done is you've fucking taken a big shit on the Jewish population. All you've done is take a big fucking shit on the people who actually are on the right side of this conflict, who want to see Hamas defeated. And I want to see Israel win this war. I want to see Israel, and I want to see Britain act like a decent ally. In the face of a terrorist group. Disgust me.
Mayor Khan has said it best. They must go. They must go. There is no coexistence with them. The last 60 years have shown us conservatively that there is no coexisting with them. If you want to keep having your babies brought back in boxes or charred remnants of them picked up little bit by little bit, then keep along this path of caring what the West thinks. It is enough. Fear God, fear Him alone, follow His word, follow His commandments, drive them out.
God, I thought I hated Cameron. I fucking hated Cameron back in the day. I thought he was the worst Prime Minister. I thought it couldn't get worse than him. Now we got fucking Keir Starmer in charge. Despise him. Him and Lammy. Pair of twats.
Well, I 100% agree. And the Labour Party have been absolutely disgraceful in their attitude to Israel. And sanctioning ministers is a ludicrous statement. The problem goes deeper than just the Labour Party. We've also got a problem with the Foreign Office. And I talk in my book about how, until I intervened, officials were going to back a motion that was essentially anti-Semitic at an international conference at the Human Rights Council, backing countries who wanted to do down Israel. And it was only because I intervened and stopped them that we were able to back Israel. In fact, France and Germany then followed us in the vote after we had shown leadership on that issue. But there is a culture within the Foreign Office of being antagonistic to Israel, of not supporting Israel, regardless of which government is in power. And we have a big problem with the permanent bureaucracy in Britain. They are consistently trying to undermine conservative policies. And I saw that in government as Foreign Secretary and Prime Minister. Even the Labour Party, but this is the very ironic thing, that Foreign Office officials still don't think David Lammy and Keir Starmer are being anti-Israel enough.
So basically, it's like, again, I could feel the narrative going the pro-Palestine camp's way again, the fucking pro-Hamas camp's way again. And then, of course, finally the dreaded moment happened when the Washington murders happened. I always felt something like that was coming. And, it's like I said, I covered various different anti-Semitic attacks that had been in London on Jewish school children, and I alluded to, similar attacks in Canada on a Jewish girls' school, and said this is getting insane. And at that point, one could plausibly, have said that, look, Israel and Gaza, it's in the news, it's in the zeitgeist, inevitably some nutter is going to snap and start, committing violent attacks. But the Washington murders were different because it was explicit. It was brazen. The guy had a manifesto, he had a social media account in which he claimed the movement, the Free Palestine movement, and he claimed that he did it for Palestine. He murdered 2 Israeli staff, a young couple, murdered them. He didn't know who they were, he didn't care, he just murdered them in cold blood.
There is no question what his motivation was. I mean, here you have a young Israeli couple, according to the young man's father, they were going back to Israel, and he was going to propose to this young lady. He'd bought a ring and everything. They were at the Jewish Museum, Capitol Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C., just blocks from the Capitol. They were there to talk about getting aid to Gaza. When it happened, he yelled out, "Free, free Palestine," the same chant that we've heard across universities in the West when they demonstrate. We've heard this how many times? Free, free Palestine is what he said. And he made it clear to witnesses inside. He walked inside the building and made it clear to people there that his motivation was political. This is terrorism. This is political intimidation. This was violence against innocent people, precisely motivated because of Jew hatred and his hatred of American policy for Israel and Israel's behavior in Gaza, which he finds apparently worth killing innocent people. There are a number of so far unconfirmed reports, like the manifesto you mentioned. Another report was that this guy was an active member. He's from Chicago, homegrown American, Elias Rodriguez, from Chicago. He was an active member of the Alliance for Socialism and Liberation, which in 2023 plastered his school with stickers that said, "Eliminate Zionists." So all of this evidence seems to be adding up in one direction, and it makes it perfectly clear. But at the scene, he made his motivations perfectly clear when he yelled out, "Free, free Palestine." He'd been pacing around in front of the museum, as I say, where they were discussing how to get aid into Gaza, of all things, and just simply gunned them down. There were many shots. They didn't stand a chance. They were shot at close range. This was obviously an act of horrific terrorism.
And it was kind of, to me, this should have been the watershed moment of, right, there's no denying it anymore. This isn't just, the Free Palestine movement, and incidentally, on the fringes of society, the odd nutter decides to, or some gang of hoodlums decide, oh, this is a perfect excuse to go attack some school kids. No, this was political. This was a political murder by an explicit, someone who was explicitly associated with this political movement, saying, "I'm doing this in the name of the cause. I'm killing people now. I'm going to commit murder now in the name of the cause." And I hope you all praise and venerate me for it. I hope he gets the fucking electric chair. I hope he gets fucking I hope he gets the fucking death penalty for it. And I was kind of a mind now, you know what, enough of this. I'm sick of these bloody activists now, and now they're actually bringing murder to our streets. And the horrible thing was, half of me was dreading something like this would happen at Eurovision. I thought maybe Yuval Raphael would meet an assassination by one of these lunatics, but it was I was dreading it could happen. But it happened in Washington instead, this Israeli couple, and that's when I kind of snapped a bit, actually. I was up all night, horrified at what happened, and eventually about 5 o'clock in the morning I decided, you know what, I'm going to actually go into town by train, and I'm going to go to the student area of the city centre, and I'm going to rip down every single Palestine poster I see. I was kind of on a mission, a warpath to do. I said, you know what, it's time I actually got confrontational. And if I get into a confrontation, I don't care what I'm gonna do. It's like, you know, it's like I was of that mindset of, I'm not gonna do nothing anymore. I'm gonna do something, probably something stupid, but I'm not gonna do nothing anymore. You know, I do have moments like that, has to be said. And I went and I started tearing down. You know, I saw posters on bins, and I started tearing them down. Some woman in a car, I think she was involved in kind of, you know, local security or something. She kind of parked a car and she went, "Hang on, what are you doing?" And said, "I'm tearing this down." And he said, "What, Palestine? The Palestine thing?" And I thought maybe she was kind of sympathetic to the Palestine thing. And I said, "Yeah, I'm tearing this down, yeah, because Palestine are Hamas, and Hamas are terrorists." And you know, I was kind of, you know, I had tunnel vision about, you know, tearing it down. And she said, "You know what, I agree, mate, they're terrorists," you know. And I was like, "Oh, great," you know. And so I decided to tear it down, and you know, as I was doing it, I was just muttering, you know, "Fuck Palestine, fuck Hamas," as I tore it down. And there was a Muslim couple who kind of walking up the street, you know, young Muslim couple. And when they saw me doing this, they actually crossed the road, you know, and said, "Look, let's avoid this guy. This guy seems deranged. Let's not get into it with him," kind of thing. And so yeah, and then I went to the university and I tore down the posters there as well. I went to one of the encampments, and that's when I began to bottle out. I think I kind of became a bit conscious of how this looked, because the encampment did have a candle kind of area vigil for the dead in Gaza, and I don't know, for some reason it kind of struck me that if I knock this down, if I vandalise this, it's a bad look. Plus, you know, there are a few people up already in the encampment. I probably could have done it, but it probably would have been a bit stupid. So I didn't do it. I kind of just decided to sod it. You know, let's not be suicidal about this, if you know what I mean. You know, you don't want to get outnumbered 10-1, basically. But I decided I was done being offensive about this. I was actually saying, you know what, you are not fucking... I'm not going to fucking stand for this war in the Middle East being brought here into the West by these lunatic activists who think they have the right to fucking kill Israelis on our soil, on our Western soil, or kill anyone on our Western soil in the name of their rotten cause. You know, I say no to that. Definitely.
He targeted these two because of their connection to the state of Israel, because they are Zionists. I want to urge you first to support Elias's actions. He is not a terrorist. He's a resistance fighter. And the fact is that the fight includes their foreign diplomats in this country and internationally. And we'll meet it with our own greater resistance and escalation.
And I was kind of of mind now, right? Well, look, the whole debate about Israel's conduct, Gaza's conduct, they don't matter anymore. The bottom line is these activists are murdering people now. These people are a threat to life. These are criminal, murdering scum. They have not got a moral leg to stand on anymore. So why the bloody hell are the police allowing them to march and demonstrate as though they have a legitimate humanitarian cause? And then not longer after that, the bold arson attack happened with that Mohammed Soliman, that scumbag from Egypt, that creep from Egypt, decided to commit an arson attack on some. In Boulder, Colorado, there was actually a group of there was a community of Jews who had this march for the hostages. It's not even particularly pro-Israel or anything. It's just remember the hostages, bring back the hostages, basically. And he decided to attack them with a Molotov cocktail and an improvised flamethrower. He burned several of those Jews alive, one of whom, an 82-year-old woman by the name of 82-year-old Karen, basically her name was Karen Diamond. So she'd been in critical condition for most of this month before she finally passed away from her burns, because of this evil scumbag who decided to burn her alive. Now, as a Brit, I do slightly try to comfort myself that, okay, this is what's going on in the American pro-Palestine camp, which is intermingled with Antifa and a particular insane kind of insane leftist enclaves in Portland and other kind of Democrat cities where the left have really gone insane. They've actually become kind of more and more radical, more and more sociopathic. Last year, of course, Luigi Mangione murdered Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare, shot him in New York City. And much like Elias Rodriguez, the Washington shooter, he was immediately lauded and praised by the left as a hero for his crime. It's like, make millionaires afraid, make Zionists afraid.
They're angry at structures and systems based off of a perception built by an algorithmic media machine that was simply trying to make them angry to make money. Now they live in a world of fear and hatred, pure hatred. And you ask them, why do you hate Teslas so much? 2 years ago, you told us we had to own one. Now you're firebombing them and cheering for it on TV. There's no logic behind what they're angry about. This is why I refer to the left largely as a cult. You have the people who are scared to defy it because they live in these areas and they know someone will shoot at them or smash their cars or their windows. So they put stickers on their cars. They put signs on their windows, please don't hurt me. And then you have people who just, without thought, will hate what they're told to hate and not be able to explain to you why. The reason I say it's a cult is because you could not define what they believe. It's impossible. You could not map the logic of their principles or plan for this country.
It's about feelings.
Yeah. I think it is, but if you break it down, it's largely about adhering to the murmuration. The left swings around randomly in random directions. Nobody knows exactly where they're turning left or right or up or down. They're just trying to make sure they stay safely in a position where someone else won't bludgeon them in the head with a bike lock. So Tesla's a great example. 2 years ago, Stephen Colbert bragged on his show he owns a Tesla. Today, he's making jokes about how it's funny that people are firebombing them. Well, that don't make sense. Today, it's fair to say that we are in a kinetic conflict. Civil strife began several years ago in the United States. Civil strife is not civil war, but there are many people dying. One of the easiest examples, of course, is Aaron Danielson took 2 bullets to the chest from a far leftist Michael Reinhold with a communist tattoo on his neck for no reason. And now we have the swattings of conservatives and the firebombings of Tesla facilities for the specific goal of destroying a company for political reasons, for which now Tesla stock has gone down. Partially, it's not the only reason. And we've seen Tesla evicted from the Vancouver Auto Show out of fear of terror attacks. This is war. If it comes to great conflict, which was not brought by the right, moderates, post-liberals or otherwise, conservatives, then I hope they win. And I hope they do what must be done to win, to preserve what we view as our moral worldview. The left we would describe in this country is engaged in violence and doesn't share that moral worldview. And I believe they're poised to accelerate and escalate this conflict. I just hope it doesn't actually get there.
Well, so do I. But why do you think they're poised to accelerate?
I would actually say there's no evidence to suggest they would de-escalate. There's no indicators of de-escalation. In fact, we've only seen them cheering on and calling for more violence. After the killing of Luigi Mangione, Bill Burr, the comedian, prominent liberal, he said billionaires should be put down like dogs. He then said free Luigi several times, and he continues to attack the wealthy and advocate for murder. Jimmy Kimmel and Stephen Colbert mocked the terror attacks. Some interpreted that as a permission or a call for more or social acceptance. Jordan Klepper on The Daily Show played several clips of terror attacks against Tesla facilities, which include public shootings, mass shootings, and the audience cheered for it, to which he responded, wow, you guys like petty acts of domestic violence. Of domestic terrorism, not violence. These people are publicly cheering for more. They're going online and saying, do it. There's viral videos across TikTok, Instagram, and X where people say, do it, and you know what I mean. One woman recently got a visit from the feds because she said, it will be me, I'm going to. None of them have said what it is, but everyone knows what it is.
I try to convince myself that the left wing here is not yet that crazy. Certainly not to that degree, and not yet that much of a threat to public order. Plus, America has the death penalty, and hopefully, if Luigi Mangione and Elias Rodriguez and Mohammed Soliman get the fucking chair, then it'll be in some ways a deterrent and in some ways a great entertainment for those of us who want to see these scumbags die. See these, so we want to see justice done. But I thought this has to be a turning point. We have to hold, it's time to hold this movement's feet to the fire about this, about the murders that have been done in their name. And I did my best on Twitter to keep on making that point. It just seemed to get worse and worse, though. I kept on making the point again and again on Twitter in a kind of quite trollish way, but I thought it was important to say, you know what? Why aren't people holding this movement to account for this? Why is it still about the whole Israel-Palestine issue when the bottom line is this movement is causing people in the West to murder people, murder innocent people in cold blood. And they're claiming they're humanitarian. The pro-Palestine lot are claiming to be humanitarian. They're bloody moral hypocrites. This is the proof that the humanitarian aspect was always a bid for a sick, evil, murderous agenda to destroy the Israeli state, to kill 9.4 million Jews in Israel, and bring anti-Semitism back into vogue into the West. That was the agenda of the Soviet Union, you know, and it was the agenda of the Arab League, and it was years in the making, and it developed a will of its own.
The Soviet Union was challenged or criticized or attacked for anti-Semitism. This was the period of after Stalin and post-Stalin. In the United Nations frameworks, talking about human rights violations or the Committee for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, the Soviet response was always, you're supporting Israel. Israel's an apartheid state. Israel's a racist state. Zionism is racism. And so all these terms were very frequently heard in the United Nations beginning in the 1960s. And it wasn't just Soviet delegates and representatives, also the Arab League, number of states and countries, as they began, they were accepted into the UN. That became a dominant theme. And you had, in 1975, the UN adopted this, the UN General Assembly, this resolution said Zionism is racism. The term apartheid was mixed in with all of that all the time. And then it came back up again at the 2001 United Nations sponsored Durban Conference Against Racism. In the final declaration of the NGO Forum, 1,500 organizations, 5,000 delegates in the stadium, by a voice vote, which was not a vote at all, adopted a final declaration and plan of action that used the terms that singled out Israel and said Israel is a racist apartheid state, also guilty of ethnic cleansing and genocide. All that language was in there. We didn't hear that much about it outside of those frameworks, but it became a much more emphasized theme. It became amplified about over the last 5 or 6 years, toward the end of the 2018, 2019. We began to see NGOs. It looks like, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but it looks like, and the NGOs do work together as a network. One NGO after another came out with a report, first Israeli NGOs, Palestinian NGOs, and then Amnesty and Human Rights Watch. Big reports, Israel is an apartheid state.
Tonight, Palestinian UN Representative Mansour played the role of victim of the United Nations. Last Friday, he did exactly the opposite. Threatening the United States, he boasted, and I quote, "We have a lot of weapons in the UN." Friday's posture rings truer, for indeed, Palestinians and their co-conspirators in the Organization of Islamic Cooperation have weaponized the UN. They've spent 7 decades hijacking and corrupting UN institutions in support of their violent, xenophobic rejection of a Jewish state. The UN's failure to fulfill the promise of promoting peace and security and protecting human rights was the predictable casualty. In practice, the UN's international democracy formula allowed Saudi Arabia to be elected to the Human Rights Council in October, for a 4th term. Iran was elected to the UN Commission on the Status of Women, even though President Rouhani himself was elected only after 99% of candidates were summarily disqualified, including every woman. One might describe UN democracy as one despot, one vote. The General Assembly hasn't held an emergency special session in 20 years on any subject but Israel. 400,000 dead in Syria, and a few weeks ago, all the General Assembly could muster was a 3-hour informal session to discuss the possibility of eventually having a special session on Syria. No emergency special sessions were ever held on genocide in Rwanda or Sudan. But the Assembly did manage to adopt, during President Likatov's term, 19 resolutions condemning Israel and only 7 critical of human rights conditions in any of the other 192 states. Or take the General Assembly on terrorism. There is no UN definition of terrorism, because at the UN, one man's killer of women and children is another man's natural outlet for frustration and territorial disappointments. So the Security Council has never condemned the terrorist organization Hamas. The 13-year-old Israeli girl who was stabbed in the back while sleeping in her bed by a Palestinian teenager this past June doesn't count. Or, as Palestinian Ambassador Mansour said as he opened a UN exhibit last year, in November, I'm going to quote him, We are so proud that the backbone of this popular uprising are the youth of Palestine. Since he spoke, 30 Palestinian miners have killed and attempted to kill Israelis.
It's like nothing seemed to stick to this movement. It's like it was still the zeitgeist, even though it should have been tainted with murder, tainted with blood. Nothing seemed to change, and there was still a certain awkwardness for me because, you know, I felt like, well, my mum has been out of the loop in a lot concerning a lot of this. The march is still important to her mental health. I don't know how I'd approach the march. I don't know, and you know, if I sabotage it, I'm just going to cause her distress, needless distress. You know, but still, it seemed to be the dominant zeitgeist. There were two incidents that really kind of, you know, starkly struck me just how much it had become the zeitgeist. The anti-Israel sentiment had just become the zeitgeist. Was when Iran attacked Israel, and there was clearly no attempt to even cover it, you know, to try and even hide it anymore. That, you know, Israel did a preemptive strike on Iran, on its nuclear facilities, on its nuclear scientists, and a lot of its and a lot of its kind of upper guard, its upper echelons. Apparently their assassinations were so successful in eliminating so many of the top generals in Iran that it actually caused the Ayatollah Khomeini to have a nervous breakdown, because he was so devastated at the immediate loss of so many trusted generals, and it made his paranoia far worse. He was, you know, I mean, it's strange, really. Ayatollah Khomeini does seem to be quite a sentimental kind of guy in some ways. But, you know, it's a shame he didn't apply that to reforming Iran into something more benevolent and humanitarian.
So Israel is now at war with Iran. I guess in some ways it's been a long time coming, but it does seem to have been quite swift and a little bit sudden. Are you surprised, or do you think this is something that had to happen eventually?
I'm not surprised that Israel felt the need to attack Iran at all. This wasn't the 11th hour. This wasn't even the 59th minute. This was midnight. The Israelis have had very credible intelligence that two things were happening which caused an existential crisis that Israel had to deal with immediately. The first was that Iran was now at the point of working out how to fit nuclear material onto its missiles. And secondly, it had ramped up its ballistic missile production to produce 300 missiles per month. Each missile could take apparently 1 ton of explosive. And as a result, this was considered to be an immediate existential threat, which Israel had no choice but to confront. I'm not privy to, obviously, to the discussions that Prime Minister Netanyahu had with President Trump. I have no idea what assurances Trump gave Netanyahu, but I do know that Netanyahu felt he had to go to war regardless. And it was a tremendous act of courage, political courage, because at that stage, all we knew was that Iran had thousands of extremely powerful missiles, much more powerful than missiles which have been constantly raining down on Israel over many years, from the Hamas, from the Hezbollah in Lebanon, and most recently from the Houthis in Yemen. These missiles were much more powerful, much more lethal, could do much more harm. The first we knew that Israel had attacked Iran, which it did, seems a long time ago now, but I think it was only in the early hours of last Friday morning. The first we knew was at 3:00 in the morning. This was tremendously ferocious shriek emanated from our phones, all of our phones across the country. And we all leapt into the shelters. And at that point, we knew this wasn't the Houthis. This was Iran. At that point, Israel alerted the entire country because at that point they thought that it was quite possible that Iran would immediately unleash salvos of thousands of missiles. In fact, that didn't happen. What we now know, what we came to know in the next few hours, and this was a surprise to all of us, was the stunning, unprecedented success of those initial attacks by the Israel Air Force, which took out, I think, the entire Iranian military security leadership and a number of nuclear weapons engineers, nuclear program engineers. And consequently, the regime, one surmises, was thrown into such chaos and confusion that it was several hours before they got their act together and started reprisals. So that was a surprise. The sheer audacity, brilliance, and extraordinary coordination and planning, and the fantastic intelligence work that had been 20 years in the making, in which Mossad agents had been embedded in Iran. I can imagine how dangerous that was all those years, and had set up amazing things like drone factories, which were existing without being detected and which sprang into action as soon as the attack started. So this was a surprise, the extent of the brilliance and the ingenuity and the daringness of it. But the fact that Israel attacked, no, that wasn't a surprise at all.
No, absolutely. It began almost a week ago now with that incredible, audacious, as you say, strike on primarily Iranian nuclear facilities, a lot of the IRGC, top brass, nuclear scientists, and so on. I think really demonstrating just how far Israel had penetrated into the upper echelons of the Iranian regime there, launching drones from within Iranian territory itself and executing what I think was, as you said, a very sort of surgical attack on the regime that had been menacing them for so long, but also most crucially had been revealed to be enriching uranium up to the 60% level, which is within kind of striking distance of what you need to load onto a nuclear weapon.
On the first day, it seemed like Israel kind of made a decisive winning strike, and I remember listening to Twitter Spaces of an Iranian girl saying, looking at all the reports of the assassinated Iranian generals, and saying, "Oh, yes, God bless you. You've taken, God bless you, Israel. You've taken away our oppressors, our cruelest oppressors. You've killed our oppressors. I've been longing for this day forever." And hopefully this will be the freedom for the Iranian people. Then Iran had retaliated the next day, and they made major blows to Tel Aviv. The Iron Dome was overwhelmed. Iran unveiled kind of new supersonic missiles that cut right through the Iron Dome, and Tel Aviv was ablaze. Hospitals were hit, families were hit, and for a moment I thought maybe Israel had badly miscalculated, and now this war was going to. I did think maybe this could be the end of Israel. Certainly it was the end of Israel's invincibility. And on Twitter I saw so many of these activists celebrating and saying, "I stand with Iran," and delighting in the carnage of the Israeli people, and I felt so sick.
Obviously, since then there's been exchange of fire day by day. You've had Israel continue to degrade the kind of ballistic missile capacity as well as the nuclear facilities, as well as continuing to effectively kind of assassinate from the air various Iranian figures. Iran's aim in the other direction, a little more sloppy, shall we say, today. On the day that we were recording, a hospital in southern Israel was hit. There's also been apartment blocks which have been torn apart by Iranian fire. And of course, now we're getting to the point where, and our viewers and listeners might well know much more than us by the time this actually comes out, given how fast things are moving, about what happens next, particularly in relation to the US. It's become pretty clear that whilst Israel has been very effective in degrading some of their nuclear facilities, particularly in the Natanz site, that the Fordo one, the one that's kind of buried in this mountainous terrain, would require American bunker busting munitions and most likely American planes as well in order to get through. And Donald Trump has essentially been trying to signal that he's very strongly thinking about it, I suppose. There's a big debate going on about whether or not this is a bluff, a kind of madman tactic to try and bring the mullahs around the negotiating table, as seemed to be Trump's intention going into all of this.
And I thought, how the hell? And the worst, I saw kind of people I knew in Britain joining in, and I thought, how the hell did my country become so full of a bunch of despicable traitors to that fucking vile, misogynistic, murderous Iranian regime? It was disgusting. And I felt really ashamed to be British that day. That was the lowest point I've ever felt as a Brit. And I'm not the most patriotic person in general, but that was kind of the limit.
It was really interesting there to hear you say that this was not even the 59th minute, this was midnight. And that's the thing that struck me as well over the past few days, which is that it's really Israel's patience that I am quite surprised by, and the fact that it has taken until the past week for Israel to take this action. Because think about the fact that, leaving aside the past few decades, over the past couple of years, Iran has fired hundreds of missiles at Israel. It did so in April last year and in October last year. Also, Hezbollah, Iran's proxy, has fired around 5,000 rockets at northern Israel over the past 20 months, causing 60,000 people to be displaced and, of course, 12 Druze children to be massacred. And then, of course, there's Hamas, another Iranian-linked proxy, which launched the worst attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust less than 2 years ago. So Iran has been attacking Israel on many, many fronts for the past 20 months, pretty much constantly. So when people say, and a lot of people are saying this, that Israel is now launching an illegal, unprovoked war of aggression against poor Iran, that is to all intents and purposes just a lie, isn't it?
Well, it's a complete lie. What people don't want to understand is that what they think of as a war between Israel and the Palestinians in Gaza, and what they looked on with some perplexity at another war by an amazing coincidence that Israel had with people called Hezbollah in Lebanon. They don't understand that what was launched on October 7, 2023, was the opening salvo in a final onslaught by Iran to exterminate Israel, in which Iran was largely working through its proxies in what was a 7-front war. It consisted of, apart from Iran, it consisted of Gaza, Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and what's called the West Bank, all of which basically erupted in various ways at the same time. And this was part of Iran's strategy to surround Israel with what they called a ring of fire, in which Israel would be kind of suffocated, strangled, whatever you like to use as a metaphor, but basically destroyed by the pressures of terrorism, of missiles, and of pressure to leave the country by wearing everybody down through demoralization.
Taking out a nuclear facility of a country that's threatening the entire region and maybe even the world, shouldn't the UK be full-throated behind this?
Well, of course, but we have a government which is busy appeasing Islamicism. I mean, that's what is going on. We've had an appalling scandal of young girls being groomed by majority Pakistani gangs going on for decades. The Labour Party have been dragged kicking and screaming into having a national inquiry on it because they do not want to upset radical Islamists in Britain. That is the bottom line. And that is the lens through which they see all of international policy. And you're right, they haven't been able to say whether they support the attacks or don't support the attacks, because they're also trying to curry favor with the Trump administration at the same time. And they are devoid of principles. They are simply focused on appeasing various factions of the left in Britain. So you've got the human rights lawyers, you've got the extreme Islamicists, you've got the eco-zealots, and their governing party is really a coalition of all of these groups of people. And what they've all got in common is they all hate the West.
Then at the same time that was happening, of course, there was the kneecap trial, where they're trying to prosecute one of the singers and one of the rappers in Kneecap. And there was a huge kind of gathering of their bloody sycophantic fans and commie lawyers, saying that they were going to and then championing Kneecap, and I was just disgusted. It's like, these people have praised Hezbollah, who murdered Drew's children, who caused unimaginable grief to so many people in the Middle East, who lost family to the murders committed by Hezbollah. And I just felt this is I am genuinely looking at a lost cause generation. A generation that's just a lost cause, that's morally lost, that's morally beyond it. That's absolutely captured by a satanic zeitgeist, and they think they're so well, they think they're such experts on this whole thing. And they think they're on the right side of history. They're fucking satanic. They're deranged. They've chosen the side of absolute evil in this. Evil barbarism. Baby killing. Nazism.
And Joe, I mean, we've not just seen condemnations of Israel, which are par for the course, probably not even worth the remarking on anymore, but people actually waving the Iranian flag in London, in Glasgow, in the Western world. I mean, what do you make of that?
Well, I think it's quite astonishing, and I can only hope that these people are so ignorant that they don't really know what it is they're celebrating. Because if they look at the oppression of women, as Ashma Amini as the most famous example, woman who showed hair from her hijab and was arrested and then died in police custody, and far from the only woman. I mean, this is one of the most oppressive regimes in the whole world, brutally murdering its own citizens, women for showing their hair, anybody who seems to protest. I mean, men who've been executed for joining women in protesting against the regime. All the things that these liberals, anti-war protesters, claim to be in favour of, the Iranian regime is against. It's the most misogynistic, homophobic, backward regime you can imagine. And yet the people who seem to hate Israel so much, they're prepared to swallow all of that and take to the streets with Iranian flags. I just think it's morally degraded. It's completely disgusting. And you just can't imagine what people in Iran who've been fighting against the regime themselves must think when they turn on the television and see Western idiots taking to the streets, waving the flag of the regime that they hate so much themselves.
And then, of course, Glastonbury happened, and that was where it got worse. The chants got worse. I just looking at Glastonbury made me really, really dread for my country's future, thinking this really is the zeitgeist now.
The most famous examples are Bob Vylan and Kneecap are the ones who have been hogging all the social media space up. Kneecap, who on stage have said, up Hamas, up Hezbollah, prescribed terrorist organizations, although they've also said they never supported those groups. But we should talk about whether or not they are on stage, and it's very complicated, that band, because sometimes they're like, oh, we're just a satirical band, it's not real, and then sometimes they sort of seem to really be quite earnest and mean it. Nevertheless, they are an act, so maybe we should take them as an act. And they are Irish, who don't have a very proud history when it comes to fighting the forces of evil. Maybe we should talk about their neutrality in World War II. But there's also this guy called, or a band, I think, they're called Bob Vylan. And this was the more striking to me for a couple of reasons. He chanted on stage, the thing that's gone very viral is him saying death, death to the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force.
Death, death to the IDF! Death, death to the IDF! Death, death to the IDF!
So actually some right-wingers are coming out and saying that's anti-Semitic. Well, that's not what occurred to me when I heard him say that. What occurred to me is, why didn't he say death, death to Hamas? That because I wouldn't have a problem with him saying death, death to Hamas. So Hamas are a death cult who have kidnapped, raped, and still hold hostage, I think, about 50 Israelis dead and alive from October 7th, 2023. And they are explicitly genocidal. It's in their charter that they wanted to kill Jews. They are, on top of all things, terrorizing the Gazans. They're torturing the Gazans.
But
you
I
can
get
see
that,
this.
but if
you're
chanting death to anybody at a music festival just seems to go against everything on which music and festivals are founded upon. It's a sort of the hippie culture. If we think back to Woodstock, love not war, all that counterculture, and yet you suddenly got somebody chanting for the death of an organisation. So I just don't think chanting death to anybody is appropriate.
I tried to keep this hope alive in me that, okay, the pro-Palestine camp, yes, it's popular. Yes, it's probably more popular today than it's ever been in the past. But, they do say pride comes before the fall. Because, the hope I clung to was, the pro-Palestine camp. It had never been this popular before in the past. The pro-Palestine cause has never been more popular. Worldwide, millions behind it. It's never been a more popular cause. But on the converse side of things, it has also never been more hated. Neutral, moderate fence sitters who'd never really dabbled much in the cause, probably until now would have assumed that it was a benevolent humanitarian cause that had its place, and a humanitarian cause that essentially had its place. That it was all about advocacy for human rights, and that should always have its place, basically. And that it wasn't anything to do with anti-Semitism. Most people probably thought that, and this entire 2 years has been a massive mask-off moment where huge numbers of us realised, no, this movement is far more rotten, far more obnoxious, far more malevolent and sinister, and pro-war and pro-terrorist and anti-Semitic and deranged than we thought. This has been just an ongoing nightmare. And we never saw it before. We never saw it. We never understood it until now. And it's like, Ella Bon is a classic example. She used to be pro-Palestine. In her heart, I think she still kind of is. I think she still cares about the Palestinian people, but she will never be part of that toxic movement again. Because she's seen what a rotten anti-Semitic cesspit it is, and what a sinister agenda it really has, and how much it has sold out her people. How much it has sold out, her people to the jihadists and to the Iranian regime that disgusts her to her core, rightly so. And it was things like that made me think, well, maybe it's never been more popular, but it's never been more hated, and there's never before been a moment where people have seen the mask off moment and they've never had so many receipts of what a rotten movement this is, what a rotten anti-Semitic cesspit this movement is. It's there for us all to see now in a way we've never seen before. Well, some of us have never seen it before. And that was what kind of, I guess, gave me some hope that it could backfire on itself. That it could get too popular, too big. But after, what I saw at Glastonbury, seeing that footage of Glastonbury and seeing how, that's begun to make me think, no, that maybe it's too late, it's already the zeitgeist, that I'm not seeing the people get sick of this at all, actually. I'm not seeing it. These people seem to be, everyone seems to be intoxicated with this culture. And no one seems to see anything wrong with this. GB News, I guess, is speaking out against it, but what good's that ever done? How's that ever, it's done nothing to change the kind of the cultural landscape for the better. Never has. It all just gets worse. And the youth have spoken, basically. The youth have said what they believe, and they've even said it, one day people who think like us aren't going to be here, and the youth are. The youth are, and the youth of today are going to be deciding the course of how the next generation thinks. So in the long run, this is just going to get worse and worse, it seems. I'm going to quote from Ella Callabon again. I quote from her a lot because she's probably the most eloquent voice on this, that speaks to the situation. And the moment she posted this, I thought, yeah, I absolutely chime with this so much. She says, I've been fighting this fight for 3 years now, but lately I honestly don't even know what to say anymore. I've been courageous through moments of mass moral collapse. I've spoken with surgical clarity in the face of inversion and distortion. Every risk I took, everything I did was out of the genuine belief that truth would win in the end, and it was worth making huge sacrifices for. Lately, I find myself speechless. I'm searching for words like I'm gasping for air, and the more I search, the more hopeless I feel underneath an avalanche of distortions. Everything I predicted years ago is unfolding in real time. The Overton window has moved so far that nobody even remembers what normal is anymore, yet I feel powerless to pull it back. The truth has been so disfigured that people no longer recognize reality. The liberal democracy I've been fighting tooth and nail to uphold alongside its values has been gutted by people who have no idea what it means to lose it, and too confident in the illusion of their ideologies to care. They take what we have for granted because of their fortune that their DNA holds no memories of, sabotaged systems of safety. Instead of nurturing what's precious, they attack it like an autoimmune antibodies. The hollowed-out shell of liberal democracy now glorifies authoritarianism, scapegoating and violence against minorities, all in the name of justice and humanitarianism. So what do you do? What do you do when the masses succumb more and more each day to deeper moral decay while perceiving themselves as moral crusaders? What do you do when we're living in an era of pure demoralization, yet the architects of demoralization genuinely believe they are restorers of truth and coherence? When they genuinely believe tribalism, distortion, scapegoatism, moral inversions and dehumanization is healing our world. That's the irreconcilable paradox. What's the way out of this inevitable crash? I started this by saying I once believed truth would surface eventually. I still do, but not because I think we can prevent the inevitable. Instead, that a glimmer of truth might surface from the ashes to rebuild from after the world awakens from its own destruction to find that the Intifada did not bring us to salvation after all. In other words, I no longer hope that the world will awaken from its sleep, but that it will be reborn from its inevitable death. Or should I say, its suicide. Yeah, she really spoke for how I felt at that time of... I couldn't be more sure now. I didn't feel any need to go through the ums and ahs over any sense of moral clarity about Israel's actions, you know, like I sometimes do in my videos. I was sure. It was clear to me. And yet no one cared. There was no great awakening of this fact. You know, no one was waking up. And just the overwhelming arrogance of these, largely these sociopathic college students who just will not admit they're wrong about anything. Because, you know, it costs them far too much in terms of their peer group conformity, I suppose. And they seem to genuinely think that Hamas did a noble thing in by murdering so many people in Israel and bringing such devastating war to Gaza. They somehow expose the evil of Zionism to the world in a way that needed to be seen. It's just ridiculous. It's insane.
My first claim is that October 7th was an abhorrent disaster that unleashed the worst catastrophe in the Palestinian people's history. Hi, my name is Ahmed.
So, worst catastrophe. I think that you're using specific words for specific reasons. The Nakba, catastrophe, right? I want to offer my condolences. I believe that 33 members of your family were exterminated by the Zionist entity. So my question is, how is this worse than what initiated everything, which was the Nakba in 1948?
My grandparents were pushed out in 1948, where 700,000 Palestinians were unfortunately forced to leave their homes, and in some cases had no choice but to leave their homes. Since October 7th, over 2.1 million Palestinian people have had to leave their homes due to the catastrophe that Hamas's actions unleashed by attacking Israeli communities on October 7th. Quantitatively and qualitatively, Hamas's actions have triggered one of the worst catastrophes in the Palestinian people's history, whereby 50,000 Palestinians would still be alive had Hamas simply kept its soldiers at home on October 7th,
right? So,
including family members of my own.
Mm-hmm. So by that logic, if Zionists wouldn't have colonized Palestine, then none of this would have began to begin with, right?
As a Palestinian who grew up in the Gaza Strip, what I can tell you is that...
Who put you there?
The Gaza Strip...
Who put you there?
...had immense potential to be the pride and joy of the Palestinian people, to prove that we are absolutely capable of having a functional state of our own that can rebuild our society, rebuild our heritage, reclaim our presence on the land.
The entirety of the land, or just because I believe your parents were in a refugee camp, right? They were forced into that.
So I want to shift the conversation a little bit.
Please.
You said that October 7th was one of the most detrimental things to Palestinians, correct?
Mm-hmm.
I would beg to differ, because I think the fact that, also, let's not pretend like October 7th was an isolated incident. It didn't come out of nowhere. It came after years and years and years of occupation, oppression, and siege, okay? So on October 7th, when the resistance took place, because it wasn't an isolated incident, It also happened to take place during a time where social media was rampant. So for the first time in a really long time, Palestine was in every conversation. Most everybody that you know could talk about Palestine in one way or another. They knew about what was going on, and for the first time, we are hearing people recognize how detrimental the IDF has been and the occupation has been in history. And I think that the fact that it took place during a time where social media was at its height, we're seeing people on the ground, we're seeing people take videos of the rubble of their homes, we're seeing people have to makeshift water filters so that they can have drinkable water. We are seeing children get shot for collecting rainwater. We are seeing children dying and starving and emaciated infants. And for the first time, it's not just on the news. It's on your phone. We're watching a genocide take place on our phones, and most everybody is talking about it. So how can you say that October 7th was so detrimental to the Palestinians when it is the first time that it has been brought to heightened media attention?
Well, I share your horror in what's happening in Gaza. I mean, it is an unimaginable level of death and destruction and pain and suffering and hunger and in some cases, I mean, people like being burnt in their tents and all the really horrible level atrocities that I have called out and I have said that the Israeli government and military have committed war crimes. I've actually overtly said that.
I mean, it doesn't take much to recognize that.
But my point is, I don't want my people and my family and my community and my beautiful Gaza that has meant so much to the Palestinian people there and to what remains of my family to merely become a social media phenomenon where it is on display for people to look at and say, wow, look at this is so horrible.
That's the only way. That's the only way that they can get people to recognize just how bad it really is, because there is no mainstream media covering what has been going on for 80 years. It's all skewed media.
So may I just clarify, because if so, that sounds really awful what I just heard you say. You're saying that you want to see images of dead Palestinians. You want to see...
No one wants to see those images. But if that's what it takes to get people to recognize what's actually going on instead of another Middle Eastern war, then that's what it takes. It's tragic that that's what it took.
Do you not recognize that Hamas, in official communiques, has and publicly and overtly has made it clear that part of their strategy relies on causing maximum death and destruction in Gaza, so that the ensuing
in
imagery...
response to Netanyahu blatantly saying that his goal is ethnic cleansing.
May I just finish this point, please? That Hamas wants to generate maximum death and destruction on the ground in Gaza in hopes that the ensuing imagery can actually rile up the international community, rile up folks in the Western diaspora on college campuses, so that then this could delegitimize Israel, so that this could stop the war. I'm talking about facts on the ground as somebody who has so much attachment to the reality of Gaza on a daily basis. My brother is there right now running one of the biggest medical NGOs. He has 70 direct reports that are doing work that's saving lives. I hear from folks from the protesters
there wouldn't
Hamas.
be lives to save if there was no occupation.
How about
your brother would not have to run an NGO if the occupation never existed and they weren't constantly bombing and killing children.
My brother was there.
Sorry, you've been voted out by the majority. Please return to your seat.
Thank you very much, Dana.
And it has to be said, this is the same generation that thinks that maybe Bin Laden's, letter to America proved that he wasn't all wrong. He was right about a lot of stuff. It's like there's very little that gives me hope. Israel's best hope is to win its war with Iran, but so far the ceasefire that Trump has kind of forced into effect. And fuck you, Trump, for this. Fuck you, okay? You intervened just to the point where the Iranian people might have finally been liberated from their evil tyrants, and now they're being fucking executed in their hundreds because you decided it was better to kind of preserve the regime. Fuck you, Trump.
Over the past few days, the world has not stopped talking about Iran. The world has not stopped talking about this virtual hunger game that people are salivating at the mouth for, trying to find how many casualties are here, how many casualties are there, to prove who's right and who's wrong, who has the right to live and who has the right to die. The funny thing is that every time they talk about Iran, it seems that the one thing that nobody cares about is the Iranian people. You see, when they say Iran has the right to defend itself, they don't mean the people of Iran. They mean the regime that's killing them. Do you think that it's not lost on us that you've been standing by for the past decade after decade after decade, watching our casualties mount and saying nothing? Do you think that we haven't realized that you're only interested in Iranian casualties when you can exploit our bodies to score points in your political video game? You stood by and said nothing when 16-year-old Nika was beaten to death for protesting, when she was raped and tortured and her mutilated body was tossed out onto the streets. You said nothing. You said nothing when 16-year-old Serena was beaten to death for protesting. And you said nothing when her mother went to retrieve her body and they laughed at her and mocked her and told her that her daughter was a terrorist. And you said nothing when Serena's mother went home and killed herself by hanging herself in her living room after she saw her daughter's body. You said nothing. You stood by and watched those casualties. And now all of a sudden you care about Iranian casualties when you can use them to score points in your political hunger games. As you're watching these bombs flying in Tel Aviv, bombs flying in Tehran, you want to know who's to blame? It's you, world. It is you. When you turned your backs on the Iranian people for 46 years, you didn't just turn your back on Iran. You didn't just turn your back on the Middle East. You didn't just turn your back on the world. You turned your back on humanity. When you failed the Iranian people, you failed us all.
This reverence for Hamas. I mean, I've been pondering this reverence for Hamas lately. This reverence for Hamas. And, by the left. This reverence for Hamas by the left. And it doesn't really make sense. You know, these people claim to be anti-war. Hamas started a war. Yet they revere Hamas, who started the war. They claim that they're horrified at the way that Israel is killing children. But Hamas killed children as well. They killed Israeli children. They killed Israeli babies. And yet, they're revered as a noble resistance. It's obvious that the left. It's obvious that the left is fixated with dehumanizing and demonizing the Israeli people. In fact, it goes beyond that. You know, when we saw that footage of these activists tearing down the hostage posters. You know, that crazy frenzy, spiteful frenzy of them tearing down hostage posters. It was clear that not only do the left dehumanize Israelis and Jews, it's clear that they cannot abide the idea of Israelis and Jews being humanized, people seeing a human side to these people, because they seem to be obsessed. They seem to their chief anxiety, their chief kind of dread is at the moment, people see the human side of the Israelis. People in parliament and politics see the human side of the Israelis and see Israelis as friends and that kind of thing. Then there's a risk that they start to be okay with the things that Israel is doing in terms of the occupation, the settlers, and the supposed apartheid and martial law and that kind of thing. These things are not okay. These things are not okay, and humanizing an Israeli is a gateway drug to being friends with them. Humanizing Israelis is a gateway drug to being friends with them, and humanizing Israelis is a gateway drug to being okay with Israeli policies. And these activists are control freaks. They are trying to control for any reaction that. They're trying to control for people's emotional reactions, and that's why they tore down the hostage posters whilst flooding social media with war images of dead children throughout the Middle East. Ostensibly, dead footage of dead children, ostensibly killed in this conflict, but more often, it turns out that but quite often it turns out that some of the footage they're showing is from all over the Middle East and from years ago. Images from the Syrian civil war of children in Syria being bombed, being killed, will get mixed up in the whole diaspora, and it will get mixed up in the whole Twitter media cycle and passed off as this is what Israel is doing to Palestinians. A lot of it will be faked up. But I've come to a darker conclusion about this. Of late, I've come to a darker conclusion, a darker theory about what is going on with the this love affair that the left seem to have with Hamas. And I think I get it, actually. It's that in a dark way, in a twisted, warped way, the leftists love Hamas because they love the way that Hamas provokes Israel to be, ostensibly its most evil self, its most ruthless, vengeful self, who they can now hate even more. Hamas keeps a cycle of hatred going. Which, any kind of moderate in this does not want Hamas antagonizing the situation and, emboldening the warmongers and vindicating the warmongers. Most normal people don't want that. The left do, however, because they love to hate Israel. They love to demonize Israel. They love the fact that they can use Israel's actions in its propaganda. It's like a drug addiction. It's like a drug addiction. It's crazy. And unfortunately, it's been a 2-year drug addiction. Well, it's a drug addiction that's been fed excessively for the last 2 years. And a collective drug addiction. Who knows if we're ever going to get these people clean? We're not going to see a major. I don't see how we can have a major detox of this. But we need one. Because we've bred a generation here in the West that at the moment is looking just as irredeemable, just as beyond saving as the Gazan children I saw at that parade celebrating the death of the Bebas babies. It's ironic, really.
2 Australian nurses have been caught in a shocking anti-Semitic tirade against an Israeli. In a video posted to TikTok, the pair can be heard bragging about killing and refusing to treat Israeli patients. The male nurse says that despite the Israelis' quote, pretty eyes, he will be killed and sent to Jahannam, which effectively means hell. The female nurse says the Israeli will be killed because, quote, it's Palestine's country, not your country. Take a listen.
You know what? Oh, shit.
How are you, man?
Good, how are you, my man?
Pretty good. Are you a nurse, a doctor?
I'm a doctor, my man.
A doctor? For what?
In hospital. What about you? Where you from?
I'm from Israel, from the Holy Land.
You know what? I'm gonna be really honest with you.
All right.
I'm gonna be really honest with you. You actually got a really, really beautiful eyes.
Thank you,
but
man.
I'm so upset that you're Israeli. Like, eventually you're gonna get killed and you're gonna go to Jahannam, inshallah. Like these pretty eyes, they should stay in this world for longer.
Why do you think? Why do you think I'm gonna get killed?
It's Palestine's country, not
Hello,
your country. You piece
how
of
are you?
shit.
What's your name?
One day,
One day.
your time will come and you will die the most.
I sent him to Jahannam. I
For
literally
real?
sent him to Jahannam.
The nurses in the video are Ahmad Rashad Nadir and Sarah Abu Lebda. They both work at Bankstown Hospital in southwest Sydney. The Premier of New South Wales confirmed the two were Sydney health workers and assured the public the two had been stood down. Health Minister Ryan Park had this to say.
They are vile, disgusting and deranged individuals. Well, I don't know what explanation any of these individuals could possibly give that in any way would justify this disgusting, vile behaviour. I don't want to leave a slither of light to allow any of them to be able to think that they will ever work for New South Wales Health again.
So, now, lately there has been the Channel 4 documentary, Gaza Doctors Under Attack. Now, unlike The Settlers, I did decide to watch this one because it sounded like it was... It sounded like this actually might be a... It might be presenting a criticism with a bit more substance to it. You know, that didn't pale necessarily in comparison to the situation on October the 7th. You know, to the situation that Israel was facing. You know, I couldn't care less about The Settlers anymore. They're a non-issue compared to Hamas, and I'm insulted at the idea that I'm supposed to take them as seriously as a problem in this compared to Hamas. But doctors with the Gaza Doctors Under Attack, I decided to watch because there was still that thing of, you know what, I decided, you know, I'm not going to just be cocky about it and just say, oh, you know, it's like the whole, if I feel so cocky about, you know, my position, can I put it to the test? Can I watch the documentary? And I have to say, I did watch the documentary. I watched it in installments. It was, you know, I don't think it was really meant to be watched without ad breaks. I think it was supposed, you know, yeah, it was pretty tough going. It was tough going. What strikes me is there was very, very little coverage of October the 7th. There was very little that kind of provided the... Like, there was less than a minute devoted to the October the 7th horrors. It did show some of the October the 7th horrors. It showed what happened at the music festival. But that was, like, barely a footnote. It was, like... I think it was ultimately just about 15 seconds of footage devoted to that. And then it was all about the retaliations, and it was all about And there was a bit where they showed, the Israelis gathering to the memorial site, and then it showed them going to the watchtower where they could watch the war from a distance. And so it was already being framed as, look how vengeful and sick the Israelis are for wanting to see, the Gaza Strip pummeled, for wanting to see their enemies that tried to massacre them punished with retribution.
He got injured. They shot at us at the operative room.
Israel has been killing the very people trying to keep the healthcare system alive, its doctors and medics, despite hospitals and healthcare workers being protected under international law. As Israel has bombed Gaza, hundreds of Palestinian doctors and medics have refused to leave their hospitals.
We are in the theater, in the operating room. Full darkness, no water, no electricity. But we have a hero, surgeons, in Gaza.
Israel claims Hamas uses hospitals as part of its military strategy. Hundreds of medics have been killed. Hundreds have been detained. Many of them have been forcibly disappeared. Our Palestinian team on the ground have gathered testimony from health workers and their families.
المهم علقوني في قلب زي المعلقين هذول كلهم معلقين علقني كله بنزف دم.
And Israeli whistleblowers have told us they witnessed Palestinian prisoners being tortured, and that some Israeli medics are complicit.
I don't even think that in the Israeli society there is a need for cover-up these days. You can do almost whatever you want when it comes to Gazans.
But basically, the documentary is quite hard to watch. Naturally, the IDF do not come off in it well at all. They rarely do. They're always presented to this kind of shadowy aggressor that, no one can get any kind of it's presented as kind of this faceless bureaucracy of a war machine that you can never get a kind of clear answer on or clear justification on. And it shows the fact that they keep on attacking hospitals and kind of attacking the area around them. Now, what strikes me is there's always a bias because they never actually they don't really present the context of why the IDF are doing this. It's quite late into the documentary where the narrator actually says something about, that there are hostages who said they were held in one of the hospitals. And so, it's almost like it's barely acknowledged as a reason and raison d'etre for why the IDF have to go into the hospitals, why the IDF have been raiding the hospitals, because they're looking for the hostages. They're trying to rescue their people. That's never gone into. There's a lot of footage about the scenes where the prisoners, people are detained, staff and are detained at the hospital and they're bound and shirtless and basically stripped down to their underwear. Men stripped down to their underwear and paraded.
Where they were being photographed, this weird photographing people, with a soldier just stood back and filming these men. You should have some respect for older men, doctors. You've got them standing there in their pants, and you feel we don't.
And what about the Amnesty International?
Let me just finish. I shouldn't say what they are thinking because actually, halfway through this documentary, I said to Mark, "I'm sorry. There will be many of those IDF soldiers that are doing these heinous things, right, who are devastated. Because I'm sorry, most 19-year-old, 20-year-olds don't want to be doing that, do they? Do they? You have to be seriously brainwashed to be able to treat other human beings like that.
There's no kind of acknowledgement of the nuance of the fact that this is what the IDF have to do if they're dealing with potential suicide bombers or Hamas militants who are engaged in perfidy, dressed in civilian clothing, prepared to do an ambush. They might be armed. The stripping them down is necessary to ensure they've got no arms on them and they're not going to do an ambush. I mean, if you read Douglas Murray's on democracies and death cults, he explains there's loads of ambushes in the Gaza Strip. Hamas always prepares for ambushes like that, and tragically, because of that, sometimes mistakes happen. The IDF, there was a situation where 3 hostages got shot by the IDF because the IDF was so highly strung by the combat situation. They weren't sure who was coming at them, and so when they saw the hostages, they thought they were being ambushed. They reacted quickly. They shot, and they sadly will have to live with that mistake for the rest of their lives, that they accidentally killed 3 of their own people. They killed the people they were hoping to rescue. And of course, they're having to work. Some of the soldiers are sleepless, and have to. It's like it's kind of tireless combat against a tireless, determined enemy like Hamas. It's exhausting, and with the exhaustion, mistakes happen as well. That's just a fact. But there's no acknowledgement that that's why they have to evacuate people southward. Because they're preparing for a combat situation in which anyone moving has to be considered a potential threat who's coming to kill them. That's just the reality of it.
For a fact, it's come up in the comments, for a fact, people will dismiss this because some of the doctors supported, what Hamas did on October the 7th. Everyone has to understand that October the 7th has happened in a continuum. This horror story of the occupation and the oppression of the Palestinians didn't start on October the 7th. October the 7th wasn't day one. Now, no amount of Hamas can support, justify, or validate the most disproportionate use of violence against a population and a targeting of an entire medical establishment. Until you've walked in an entirely compromised population's shoes, you can't judge any Palestinian doctor's opinion on an occupying force. I would put it like that.
It's like it's kind of at a last minute they will kind of narrate a the story of a particular doctor, and they'll just say at the last minute, the doctor did praise the Hamas, the October the 7th attacks. It's like, well, why are you saving that till the end? That hints that they might actually be complicit with Hamas as the IDF suspect, and that there might be actually a lot more collusion between Hamas and the doctors than is made out. So you're kind of presenting these people as almost as, for the most part, as innocent, but you kind of let that in, but you left it last minute so that to avoid prejudicing the viewer against the doctor up till that point. It's a kind of it's strangely done, but it's vivid. I mean, you do see the carnage, you do see the there are sights in that did upset me deeply. Like I said, I thought my sympathy for these people was gone, but I was wrong. It was like, it was still hard to watch that. And the most damning part of it is when it looks at prison abuses that have happened in apparently have been happening in detention centres.
And Israeli whistleblowers have told us they witnessed Palestinian prisoners being tortured, and that some Israeli medics are complicit.
I don't even think that in the Israeli society there is a need for cover-up these days. You can do almost whatever you want when it comes to Gazans.
No, I'm not an expert. It's a charge made. Do I disbelieve it? Do I believe it? I don't know. Do I disbelieve it? I can't say I disbelieve it. That has to be said. But then, I was watching a documentary that certainly wanted to manipulate me into feeling a certain incriminating, certainly wanted to leave me with an incriminating impression of Israel. There's been descriptions of torture. Some of it does sound pretty graphic, if it's true, if the victims are telling the truth.
But for me, one of the most haunting sections in it was voiced by an actor, the whistleblowing doctor.
I know.
Who very calmly described a scene that was like a scene from a movie like The Marathon Man or something. A true torture. And the most chilling detail that he gave about not administering painkiller to any of the Palestinian prisoners was the fact that they would be blindfolded, so they couldn't connect with anyone's eyes, so they were just a number. What does that remind you of? This was frighteningly close to what we've heard subsequent to World War II. Frighteningly close. And are we looking at... hang on, let's just name it. Hurt people hurting people. Hurt people. And it feels like there is deep, chilling, echoey reverberations here.
But yeah, it's possible Israel is committing these human rights abuses on prisoners. Israel has a lot of bitter feelings towards the Gazans after October the 7th, after those horrors. There might indeed be a culture where these could just say, we want our pound of revenge now. We should be entitled to our pound of revenge. And even people who might have been more sympathetic and more kind of human rights conscious of the Palestinians before then might have shifted position and said, we want our pound of revenge. But the main thing that kind of comes to mind for me is, well, that's been the narrative all along. Israelis dehumanizing Palestinians. Again, it's never portrayed the other way. It never shows how Palestinian children are brainwashed as kids to believe that stabbing Jews is the sacred duty in life. And that's why October the 7th happened, because there were trusted Palestinians who, there were Palestinians with work visas who used to commute to the Gaza Strip and used to commute from the Gaza Strip to the north to the south of Israel and work, collect good wages, working in Israel and take them home. There were a number of left-wing communes in the south of Israel that took these Palestinians as friends, only for the trust to be betrayed, because they basically betrayed information about their communes to Hamas. And that's how much the Palestinians have been taught to not see the Jews as human.
And the idea that there any part... I tell you one thing, Piers, it's very, very obvious when you're here in the period after the massacres of October the 7th. It doesn't matter whether you're right-wing or left-wing. It doesn't matter whether you're a peacenik, like many of the people who were murdered in the kibbutz, or a supporter of Benjamin Netanyahu. Nobody in Israel believes that they can live beside Hamas. Nobody.
No.
It doesn't even mention the Bebas babies. Kind of shows up the bias of the documentary that doesn't actually show what Hamas have been doing to their hostages. Like, there's a brief banner of the photographs of those female IDF have been captured. That really horrific video where they were being shown kind of on the ground. They were shown being surrounded by militants, and one of the militants was saying, these girls we can breed with. This really, it was the implication they were going to rape, and
בחורה שם עוברת הטרדה מינית כזאת או אחרת. לא משנה איך תנסו לייפות את זה או לשנות את זה.
That's 21-year-old Maya Regev. She and her younger brother were abducted by Hamas terrorists on October 7th from the Nova Music Festival.
למה אנחנו בכלל צריכות להתחנן? אני שומעת את מה שאומרים פה, וזה פשוט דיסק שרוט שחוזר על עצמו 179 יום. למה אף אחד לא מתעורר?
That's Yarden Gonen, who's been fighting for almost 6 months now for the release of her 23-year-old sister Romi, who was also taken hostage by Hamas at the Nova Music Festival.
למה אתם נותנים לאחותי להיות שם? מה היא עשתה רע? הילדה בת 23, הלכה למסיבה. פעם אחרונה שהיא נהנתה מהחיים שלה.
And, you know, no one talks about the Hebron massacre. No one talks about the fact that, you know, the Arabs were prepared to murder, you know, when the Jews are at the bottom of the pecking order, that's what the Arabs do to the Jews, is just massacre them in pogroms. That's never touched on. It's always about, you know, Israel is always the aggressor, it's always the dehumanizer.
A number of people are sharing their bit. Mary Clark says, and you're absolutely right to remind us of this, the Israelis are watching through telescopes as the bombs hitting Gaza. This was from Sidorov.
The settlers jumping up and down with joy.
What the fuck is
that about? The settlers have gone deranged, even more deranged in the last couple of days. I keep saying to Mark, we need to just talk about the settlers again.
So doctors aren't allowed to feel aggrieved about an occupying force, but settlers are allowed to jump up and down with glee when hospitals are being bombed and killed, people are killed in front of them.
Should we talk about Glastonbury?
It still doesn't explain how the pro-Palestine camp can justify celebrating when bombs are being dropped on Tel Aviv. Because, you know, I didn't watch that documentary celebrating when bombs were dropped on hospitals. I thought maybe this is something the IDF have to do, but I don't relish it. And I hope that, you know, everyone gets to safety as quickly as they can. You know, I hope there can be survivors, and obviously it's all the harder when, you know, you've got hospital patients who are kind of bedbound. But, you know, it's Hamas who chose to use those hospitals as bases or as hostage dungeons or hostage torture centres. You know, an evil enemy like that leaves you very little choice, does it?
Our Palestinian team on the ground have gathered testimony from health workers and their families.
المهم علقوني في قلب زي المعلقين هذول كلهم معلقين علقني كله بنزف دم.
Thing is, watching the interviewed survivors of the hospital bombings and that kind of thing, it feels like Channel 4 it feels like the documentary makers are kind of conscious, kind of blissfully unaware that what they're presenting, you know, showing the arrests, showing the family in the aftermath, you know, talking about life since that attack, they're basically showing that there is no genocide going on there. There's no genocidal intent. There's no genocidal operation. You know, the worst it shows, okay, is horrific, you know, is horrible, but genocide? Absolutely not. It's like, if this is the worst evidence you can provide of a genocide, it's self-incriminating on that grounds. You know, so it's, you know, it's kind of, it's left me sure of that, even if it's if nothing else.
What's happened with the Israeli propaganda has been a drip, force-fed effect in the Western media and Western populations of saying that the word Hamas justifies any amount of absolutely appalling behavior and appalling devastation and genocidal action. It doesn't. It can't. Because I will use the parallel one more time. When the IRA works perceived as an enemy by the British state, did we ever propose carpet bombing Belfast to hit 1 or 2 IRA members? It's not a policy. It's not how you conduct counter-terrorism.
You know, that highly likely that tomorrow the newspapers, the news shows will still be talking about Glastonbury and deciding on whether a flag was picked up or not, whether the words about the IDF were violent or not, were they going to incite violence or not. And I feel almost terrified that if tomorrow, again, there is not a whisper, not a shift, how will we How will we talk tomorrow about this?
Problem is, since this has aired and it's generated a lot of outrage, I feel like I'm probably going to have to leave it about a fortnight before I tear down another Palestine poster in public, because I think if I do it anytime soon, it's going to look like it's going to be a really bad look for me. I bet the Liverpool march is going to be full of people now even more emboldened to chant death to the IDF, and bloody wrong uns. The marchers, I mean, not the IDF. The IDF are not perfect, but at the end of the day, they are fighting to protect their families, their children back home. And it does sicken me the way they are demonized for that. You know, if anyone should be demonized, it's Hamas. So it hasn't changed my view. I'm kind of headstrong in this, but I know that that documentary has made, you know, the hope of this, the tide turning, and made the tide turning that bit harder. Even Mark Steele was tweeting about it, saying, you know, if you watch this and you're fine with it, then you're not human, you know, and you should go join another species. So, get fucked, you sanctimonious twat. I mean, I didn't watch it unsympathetically. It wasn't without some sympathy. But at the back of my mind was always that thought: Hamas could end this by giving the hostages back. Why does the documentary never acknowledge that fact? This war could end if they did. Now, the only piece of hope I see, however, is the recent moves to prosecute Palestine Action after they broke into an airbase and managed to pour red paint onto a cockpit, which has left a lot of people asking that question: where the bloody hell is security at these airbases? You know, most of us grew up understanding that if you broke into an airbase, you were quite likely to get shot, and the expectation you would be shot was enough to prevent you from breaking in. And like I said, you know, I think, you know, if the military did shoot these Palestine activists, it'd be self-defense. You never know when one of these Palestine activists is going to start murdering people.
He targeted these two because of their connection to the state of Israel, because they are Zionists. I want to urge you first to support Elias's actions. He is not a terrorist. He's a resistance fighter. And the fact is that the fight includes their foreign diplomats in this country and internationally. And we'll meet it with our own greater resistance and escalation.
You know. So the soldiers have to defend themselves from people who might be inclined to become a bit murdery these days. I did notice, however, that this is when quite a lot of patriots started speaking up in the comments and saying, why the bloody hell are these people breaking into our bases? You know, this whole... what they'd done was they'd possibly crossed a line and pissed off the patriots fully. You know, that you know, this was an affront to to patriotism in Britain, and that it might be, and you know, it spoke to a hope that maybe people have had enough. You know, that maybe this is the one group of people you don't want to piss off, and who finally see this. You know, this is. You know, and see that, you know, what Palestine Action did by doing that was actually they threatened our national security. You know, if you know, some of these planes might actually be needed to fight a war in Ukraine, if it comes to that, you know. we're going to be defenseless because of their sabotage. They're sabotage. They're traitors. They should be considered enemy agents now.
Today, Britain was attacked by a rabid, far-left, pro-Palestine mob. Palestine Action broke into RAF Bryce Norton, spray-painted a British military plane. Well, it's the same Palestine Action who've done stuff like this before as well, breaking into warehouses, damaging property. They're a menace, basically, aren't they? And Keir Starmer refused to name the problem, OK, put a tweet out. He thinks that breaking into a British military site and damaging a plane that was apparently next to the one that our royal family sometimes fly in is just a bit of vandalism. That's what it is. Just a little bit of vandalism. That's what it is. Nigel Farage, however, thinks it's terrorism and that they should be classed as terrorists. Robert Jenrick appears to think exactly the same. So, should Palestine Action really be banned as a terrorist group? Well, in the last few hours, it appears that it might be happening.
And I thought, well, maybe this is good. Maybe we can keep this momentum going and actually have these people prosecuted. But there's always a fear, you know, activist judges, activist lawyers are going to intervene to get them let off lightly. We still have a captured judiciary that's going to keep this going. At least Trump is going to war with this kind of this captured judiciary. No one in Britain is doing that. No one in Britain can be counted on to do that. We're at their mercy, basically. And all because of Tony Blair, who ceded more and more power to the human rights lawyers.
Well, the main story we're talking about on Talk Drive today is Hamas using the European Convention on Human Rights to challenge its prescription as a terrorist organisation in the UK. One of the barristers behind that at Garden Court Chambers is Frank McGuinness, who joins me now. Frank, good evening.
Good evening. Good day, Martatu. How are you?
Tell me, Frank, I don't want to mischaracterise this. This case, to me anyway, and tell me if I'm wrong, is specifically saying that Hamas should not be prescribed as a terrorist organisation in the UK.
Yes, that's right. It's not a case yet, is it? It's an application, and it's for the Secretary of State to decide it one way or the other. And if she decides that she doesn't want to deprescribe, then it becomes a case if my client, Hamas, decides to appeal that decision to the judiciary.
Have you we hear about barristers taking cases on the taxi rank and so on, especially in criminal cases. Have you decided to take this case?
What do you mean?
Has it been your decision to take this case? You've been instructed and you've decided to take the case?
Who else would have decided to take the case? I don't understand. So of course I decide what cases I take.
How do you sleep at night?
That's a baffling question because, I mean, do you want me to answer that question? I will if you want.
Yeah, I mean, Hamas are terrorists, aren't they? It's so unbelievably clear.
All right, so I'm going to answer your question. You shouldn't have asked it, but I will answer your question.
I shouldn't have asked it. We have this thing called free speech in this country, so I can ask whatever I like. Perhaps you can answer it.
I will answer the question. It's just you're talking over me. Did you want to hear my answer?
Yeah.
All right. I need you to listen to my answer very carefully because what you've done is extremely dangerous and you shouldn't have asked that question, all right? So please do listen to my response, and when I'm done, I'll say next question, all right? You have just asked me, how do I sleep at night? And what you're trying to do by saying that is you're trying to fix me, you're trying to associate me with my client. There is a very well-established principle.
You're representing them, Frank. You're representing them. You've decided to this is a conversation. I'm not going to be told whether I can talk or not talk. You've decided to represent them.
So you've invited me to talk over me because you're afraid of what I have to say, is that right?
I'm not afraid of what you have to say, but you're saying that I'm associating you with them.
You seem afraid. You seem afraid.
Afraid? We're having a conversation, and I'm asking you.
Well, at the bar, we tend to let each other speak. Is that not the convention?
I'm not a barrister. I'm an interviewer, and you're saying that I'm associating you with your client. You have told me that you have decided to represent Hamas. They are an unspeakably horrific and dreadful organisation.
Oh,
so
yes,
I am associating you with them because you've decided to represent them.
Okay, I think you might be hearing from the police. I mean, I don't know, but it sounds like you might, because the point is that, you know, the low point of this on this side of the Irish Sea was Boris Johnson and Priti Patel using the phrase activist lawyers. They knew what they were doing. They were using it to stoke anti-migrant racism. And then a man showed up with a knife at the law firm, calling by name for a solicitor who I know because they put a target on his back. And the The low point on the Irish side of the Irish Sea is Pat Finucane, of course, right? A British MP stood up in Parliament and said he's just like his clients. Pat Finucane represented members of the Provisional IRA, which is another proscribed organisation. And 3 weeks later, Pat Finucane was, of course, murdered in front of his family by loyalist paramilitaries who we now know had handlers in the British establishment. So you're playing the same. Don't talk over me.
Let's talk about Hamas. I'll talk over you if you want to. No, excuse me.
You're playing the same game. You put
I'm not playing any games. I'm not playing any games.
Target on my back.
I'm not putting a target on anybody's back. I am asking you. No, I don't.
You owe me an apology.
No, I don't. I'm asking you why you've decided. Why have you decided to represent Hamas?
Next question.
Why have you decided to represent Hamas?
And, you know, Brendan O'Neill did an article in which he gloated over the fact that, an article inspired me, he gloated over the fact that a number of activists had actually tried to travel to Gaza to lift the humanitarian siege. And they basically got the crap kicked out of them by the Egyptian locals, who were absolutely sick of absolutely had no tolerance for these interfering activists trying to lift any siege. And he was kind of saying, this is so amusing, this is proof that everyone's getting sick of this. And I was kind of commenting, saying I'm in no mood to be celebrating anything. I've been waiting 2 bloody years for people to get sick of this. It's not happening. To people to get sick of this in the West, it is not happening. We are fucked as a country because of this satanic zeitgeist, and no one seems to be getting sick of it, really. I'm seeing no evidence of it. They'd bloody do something about it, wouldn't they? But maybe Palestine Action might have crossed a line where people are finally saying, you know what, you don't piss off our patriots. You don't piss off those of us who respect our own military. But it's a hope. It's a hope that maybe they've pissed off a sleeping giant again. Maybe they pissed off a sleeping giant again, and this time people are saying, you know what, we've had enough. That maybe they've pissed off enough people, and gotten more and more people to say, you know, you bunch of twats, we want you off our streets now. We've been putting up with your shit for 2 years now, and we're sick of it. And now you're jeopardizing our national security as well. We've had enough. That's the one hope.
Mick's been in touch already and says, Peter, all those ever so caring lefty vicars, teachers, civil servants and lecturers supporting Palestine Action obviously have no concern for the young police officers who have had their leave and family holidays cancelled for months. They are simply sad, frustrated, attention-seeking frauds, says Mick. The thing with Palestine Action, this is what gets me, and I interviewed their lawyer, or one of their lawyers, the other day. I think it was on Friday on Drive. Really straightforwardly, they all did the same sign. They said, you know, I can't remember exactly what it was, but I am against genocide or genocide in Gaza. And then they said, I support Palestine Action. If they literally deleted one word, if they deleted the word action and simply wrote, I oppose genocide, I support Palestine Action. If they'd taken 6 letters off that and simply put, I support Palestine, well, they would not have been arrested. So why do they want to support a proscribed group? That's my question. I don't understand that. I understand the issues that people might have about prescription or freedom of speech or all those kind of issues. I get that. But in the act of supporting Palestine Action, holding up a sign that doesn't simply say something like Palestine Action shouldn't have been prescribed or something like that, well, actually, it's not the snappiest of slogans, it must be said. Well, that in itself would meant they haven't been arrested. They want to be arrested. That's clear. and the Metropolitan Police have to deal with that. Well, Peter Blexley is with us. He's the former Metropolitan Police detective and is with us now. Peter, just give us your thoughts on what happened yesterday. It was a huge police operation and something like 466 people lifted simply for supporting Palestine Action. I don't think they should do that. I don't think they should be supporting prescribed groups. There were a few arrests as well for alleged assault of police officers.
The rule of law is absolutely fundamental to our society. If we have a breakdown of law and order, then we have anarchy, we have nothing, and we are all in grave, grave danger. Yesterday, the Metropolitan Police, with assistance from other forces who'd been drafted in, under the leadership of Deputy Assistant Commissioner Adi Adelakan, put forward an operation that outwitted, outthought, outflanked those pathetic and pious Palestine Action supporters. It was a huge victory for the rule of law. It was with huge praise that I thank the Metropolitan Police. And overall, this is policing as we need to see it done.
I mean, the hope I would cling to, the hope I tried to cling to was that in years to come, maybe 10 years to come, the pro-Palestine camp, the self-immolation of Aaron Bushfire, not Bushnell actually, and the deranged shit that was posted on Twitter about it all, and the murders in Washington, that maybe, just maybe, 10 years from now, people might be inclined to look back on the pro-Palestine camp as being the Jonestown cult of today. Look back on it in the same light as the Jonestown suicide cult. You know, the young, impressionable, vulnerable people who were so misanthropic, so disillusioned in society that they all collectively killed themselves in the belief that their spirits were going to ascend to some passing comet or something. And maybe it will be remembered in the same vein as that kind of period of bizarre collective madness that no one put the brakes on in time, and we look back now and think, oh my god, can you believe people actually went that far? Things must have been really bad at the time. Things must have been really, the disillusionment at the time must have been profound.
Right? Pierce, one of the things I've figured out, there's this finding, in the psychological literature that people become more conservative as they get older. And that's actually not the right way to read that data. The right way to read that data is that progressive policy, that infantile, hedonistic, self-centered progressive policy, is nothing but the political expression of radical immaturity. And that, like, classical liberalism and classic small c conservatism is something that you have to learn how to manage painfully as you get older. And so the reason that those Marxist doctrines and the socialist, hedonistic, we're going to take care of you for the rest of your life doctrines don't go away despite all the evidence that they're pathological to the core is because they are really nothing but the political expression of radical immaturity. And so that's a much better way of looking at it psychologically, because otherwise it's a mystery. Like, why do these ideas never go away despite the fact that they've been demonstrated time and time again to be utterly counterproductive? Why does Eastern Europe think that the West has lost its mind turning to these policies that destroyed them for 70 years? Well, the answer is that if you haven't grown up, you look to progressive hedonism as the expression of your failure to develop. And that's what we're seeing playing out in the West. It's probably a pathology of wealth, because it's easy to be over-coddled and turn to irresponsible hedonism and to presume that that's the appropriate political stance.
Generations grow up sometimes, and they grow cynical. I mean, Generation X is the generation that grew up during the 80s and at the time of Band-Aid. And You know, they're the generation that grew up during Band-Aid, and they believed in the whole cause of, you know, feed the starving in Africa. You know, and on paper, I would agree with it. But it's also Generation X that generally is the one that's grown up to now have a much more disillusioned view of NGOs and the kind of corruption that goes on with NGOs, and, you know, became disillusioned in what they once believed, what was kind of sold to them as the zeitgeist of its day, if you know what I mean. Generations can have an awakening later. They can grow old and cynical and a lot less idealistic. And, you know, peer groups drift apart and people start thinking for themselves. Problem is, how long is that going to take? We have a very young and dumb generation, and I think in some ways the death of Aaron Bushnell kind of brings it starkly into focus of, you know, I mean, Aaron Bushnell, when he set fire to himself, look, when it first happened, I thought that's a horrible way to die, and it was a stupid, tragic reason to do it. Then of course his last Reddit posts emerged, and they were fucking deranged. They were just full of hatred of Zionists and Jews, and they were pro-Hamas, and I thought, okay, the guy was deranged. As far as I'm concerned, good riddance to him. But the tragedy is that his parents were interviewed about his death, and I do feel bad for his parents, definitely, which, you know, might sound hypocritical because I despise him. But his parents, honestly, they were actually very politically very conservative and patriotic, and they just have no clue how they lost their son to this deranged cult, this deranged far left cult. And I don't think they're at all happy about the fact that his death has been co-opted and that he's been painted as some martyr for the cause. I think they're horrified at the way it's almost glorifying what he did, glorifying his death and glorifying how it devastated them. I think
The American parents have the right to be concerned when they see masked men on campuses. We don't know who the hell they are. They could be activists and they could be the devil. So parents have the right to say, we don't want masked men with foreign agendas on our campuses, because you don't have a leadership, and tomorrow, if the shit hit the fan, who is going to be held accountable for this situation? Who do we go after? Why your protest is not registered according to the American laws? You are just creating chaos, borrowing some victim narrative from the Middle East and trying to Americanize it, trying to globalize it. And what we say, as a person who lived the 1987 Intifada, we don't want Intifada in America, we don't want Intifada in the West, and we most certainly don't want a global Intifada.
I think they're just devastated, but it's like there's no grown-ups in the room at the moment. But eventually this generation have to grow, have to become the grown-ups later. But I'm just seeing this generation now. On the one hand, this generation at the moment seems irredeemable, but maybe they can grow up to. Maybe they can actually grow up to be shocked at what they once believed. Or what they once echoed, and think this was actually crazy. how did we all lose our minds the way we did? You know, it's crazy looking back. It was the moment we went with back then, but it's crazy looking back, if you know what I mean. Is there hope, I wonder? Is there hope that this generation might grow up and wise up and look back on in horror at what they once believed, what they once echoed? You know, at a time when there's no pressure for them to conform anymore. You know, I mean, obviously the I guess it takes, you know, maybe what's needed is a dust settling period. A period where the urgency of the war dissipates and people lose interest in the cause and drift away elsewhere, and suddenly being pro-Palestine is passé.
You see people who call themselves anti-Zionists, let's say these, you know, kids on TikTok that are wearing kafirs, celebrating October 7th, okay? This is so absurd. But not just that, just the killing of Zionists. So you have people, Jews being killed here in the United States, and they celebrate this. They say this is a good thing in the name of anti-Zionism, right? And you're seeing that this is a completely irreconcilable concept, that you think that it's a good thing to kill people for humanity. It's very Maoist, it's very Leninist, it's very Stalinist. So that is why you're seeing now people celebrating the killing of Jews, and this is just a perennial pattern of anti-Semitic persecution, which, if it's not recognized, I guess gives us not much more time for the wave of persecution to come back round again, and indeed we are seeing this.
But Elika is right. This movement is a cult. It's an insane cult of college students who are obsessed with fitting in and following the crowd. You know, the drive to conform in youth culture is always overwhelming. And when you politicize that conformity with a whole, you're either on the side of good or evil. And you can't be on the side of Israel because Zionists are evil. Then that's when you end up with that conformity pushed to overdrive, essentially. We politicized, you know, that youth culture has become politicized. And the youth haven't got a fucking clue. And, you know, just give them a bit of knowledge and suddenly they think they're experts. You know, they're dangerously arrogant without a clue. You know, it's the Dunning-Kruger effect, basically, and their thought leaders are poisonous, you know. Their thought leaders are poisonous and deranged. Or they're instructing their students to be to be deranged. You know, it's like you know, I when I was younger I read Holly Johnson's biography. Holly Johnson, you know, lead singer from Frankie Goes to Hollywood. He described growing up in Liverpool in a very kind of rough in a very rough area under a very rough family, and the thing that's really kind of striking is he's very honest about his upbringing and his family, and the one thing he kind of describes in the book is that's really shocking about his upbringing is just how horrendously racist his family was. Yeah, that it was very common for a Liverpudlian white working class family who grew up in a particularly rough area to have, back in the 60s and 70s, to have incredibly racist views. It being kind of a point of conformity, like he said. There was one time his older sister had been seen, talking to some black boy at the school, and she got an absolute battering when she got home. Said, you know, you're not going to be seen with black, you know, you're going to get a reputation if you're seen with, well, I won't repeat the word, but it's a kind of word that Alf Garnett used a lot when he was describing black people. And it's always horrible when, you know, someone's raised in that kind of family, and it's like, you know, the kids grow up in that environment, you know, where they're taught to hate black people just on sight, you know, and it's like, it's that they don't even know what they're hating, and, you know, they grow up not even knowing what they're hating. You know, it's a bit like Romeo and Juliet with the Montagues hating the Capulets and vice versa. And it's like, yeah, the kids grow up not even knowing what it is they're hating, only that they're supposed to hate them. And, you know, I think about that when I remember someone showed me this clip of a, you know, when you see kids on the pro-Palestine march, or when, you know, an activist kind of, you know, uploads a picture of, you know, I taught my daughter my 5-year-old daughter to spit at the screen whenever Benjamin Netanyahu comes on screen. And I'm thinking, those kids have never seen the October the 7th footage, have they? I certainly hope they haven't, because, you know, it's enough to mess anyone up. But what would happen if one day they did, and they realised, you know, the whole bag of lies they were taught about how Israel was completely, you know, was the evil Nazi force in this, and the Palestinians were the victims? What if they watched that footage and realised, no, the Palestinians were evil, and the Israelis were provoked by a dangerous enemy that absolutely wanted to genocide them?
And the idea that there any part... I tell you one thing, Piers, it's very, very obvious when you're here in the period after the massacres of October the 7th. It doesn't matter whether you're right-wing or left-wing. It doesn't matter whether you're a peacenik, like many of the people who were murdered in the kibbutz, or a supporter of Benjamin Netanyahu. Nobody in Israel believes that they can live beside Hamas. Nobody.
No. Well, why would you? I mean, Hamas are dedicated in their charter to the eradication of Israel, and they've proven on October the 7th they will kill as many Jewish people as they can get their hands on. And the Hamas spokesman only last week said they want to do what happened on October the 7th again and again and again. You can't do peace with people with that mentality.
I was at one of the trauma hospitals earlier speaking to some survivors of the October attacks. I was very struck particularly by one man in his, I suppose, 40s, 50s. He and his family hid in their safe room, but they didn't lock safe rooms. They couldn't lock because they were for bombs, not for Hamas terrorists coming door to door. His daughter managed to survive. He lost both his legs. He lost his wife, died in front of him and his daughter, and he lost his 14-year-old son. And after this man described what happened when his boy breathed his last, he said, look, I'm a leftist. I've always been a leftist. One of the things that I think many people outside Israel haven't realized is that many of the kibbutz, the places where people were living, the villages and towns neighboring Gaza, were filled with left-wing peacenik types. The sort of people, for instance, who there was a woman in one kibbutz who every day she drove Palestinian children to hospitals. There were people who made sure they always had Palestinian colleagues from Gaza. They would employ them. Even the peace rave near the borders of Gaza, was significantly populated by people who sort of had the peace gig. I mean, that was their belief. That was their view, that they wanted to live in peace with their Palestinian neighbours. I think that one thing that people outside Israel really haven't understood is that it is these people who were disproportionately murdered in their homes on October the 7th. You can see it literally on the signs they have on their fridges and their fridge doors in what remains of their houses. Peace signs, calls for peace. I think that this is so important to realise. And one other thing, many of the Hamas fighters terrorists who were found dead or captured alive after that day were found to have plans on them which had extraordinarily detailed issues about who lived in which house. There are stories of, there's one kibbutz where the man who was in charge of security in the kibbutz, the terrorists went to his house first and killed him and his family, and then went door to door elsewhere. How did they have all of this knowledge, literally family by family, door to door? It was because some of the people they had given their trust to had sold them out, had given information over to Hamas to get them killed. Now that is going to have in Israel a seismic effect in the years ahead.
Thing about being brainwashed, and I think that's what it is. I think the college kids in university, they've been absolutely brainwashed. You can tell by the language, the rhetoric, the way young people communicate these days, and it's all so clinical, and it's all kind of it's also academic and technical. It's all these kind of academia buzzwords pepper their conversation. It's incoherent, pretentious gibberish, but they believe it. But it's like, would there come a day where they wake up and when someone leaves a cult that's brainwashed them, they tend to never go back, and they tend to hate everything about the ideology that brainwashed them. They go completely the other way. They think, oh my God, it had a hold on my mind, it had a hold on my free will. I mean, I think it's kind of similar to why I'm no longer someone who thinks of myself as left wing. The way people are taught to think about the world and see the world, sometimes it can backfire massively. There can come a point where people awaken from the brainwashing and they never go back after. They fight hard against the conditioning and they carry on fighting. It can happen. I don't see it happening anytime soon, though. It's probably going to take a bit of a dust settling period, really. The problem is the damage that's going to be done in the meantime. Because I have a feeling Israel's going to do quite all right out of its war in the Middle East, and maybe if Israel wins this war against Iran, we might see a profoundly improved Middle East. But the West seems to be going the other way. The West seems to be increasingly more and more fucked.
Under the watch of a series of figures that I'm sure we'll come to discuss later, a Islamic network in the Home Office has grown to over 700 members. And they are explicit about their wanting to recruit more Muslim staff members, make sure Home Office policies are inclusive of Muslim needs, so they're a collective bargaining organisation on behalf of Islam. And some of these members have engaged in some very dubious activities that we know about. For example, after the Shawcross review of Prevent in 2023 was published, where William Shawcross reiterated that Islamic terrorism represents the single largest terror threat in the UK, but of the people that worked for Prevent he spoke to, they were very reluctant to connect Islam to Islamism. There was a King's College London seminar with members of Prevent to discuss counter-terrorism measures. The seminar leader said, okay, Douglas Murray and Joe Rogan have a very bad effect on the discourse, so how do we go about censoring them in ways that don't break the law? And then a member of the Islamic network sat and said, Prevent is itself inherently racist because it focuses on Islam. And a few minutes later, they played an ISIS training video. And she pointed at the screen and laughed and said, I know him, he used to go to my school. Those are the type of people we have running prevent. Those are the type of people we have running the Home Office. A couple more examples. There was a chap just a couple of weeks ago who was prosecuted for taking bribes to overturn asylum applications, I think from a migrant from Bangladesh, when it was denied. So he's just been sent to prison for that. And then there was another woman who the Conservative Woman and Christian Concern published a long article exposing. She worked for the Islamic Network. There was a Christian asylum seeker who was fleeing forced conversion in an unnamed country. She's been pseudonymized as Maria. And the Home Office rejected her application because they said her country was safe for Christians. Turns out this member of the Islamic Network had fabricated government documents to represent the country as being safe to deter away Christians. So there's clearly a kind of clannish, religious and ethnic solidarity going on, being laundered through the Home Office that is affecting our counter-terror policy and our border policy.
So am I right in saying then, to summarize, that Islam has infiltrated the Home Office?
Yes, and this is not just my opinion, it's again the opinion of William Shawcross. William Shawcross, who did the Shawcross Review, very respected academic, unless it's by the Islamic Network, he pointed to Hizb ut-Tahrir, which is now a proscribed organisation. They were only proscribed in January 2024, by the way, after, in the immediate aftermath of October 7th, there was this famous video where they gathered on the streets of London and said, with a big banner, Muslim armies rise up for jihad. So I think they were declaring their intent to repeat October the 7th, except this time in Britain. Yeah, quite. So they finally got proscribed by the Conservative government. He said that they had, since about 2008, been waging a long campaign against Prevent, lobbying people from inside the Home Office while they were outside it to deprioritize and soften their approach towards what did and didn't constitute Islamism. And the perfect example of this is a chap called Mohammed Kosbar, who met with Sadiq Khan on a number of occasions. He was on the Met Police's board of advisors for Islam. And in the aftermath of October the 7th, he celebrated Hamas as masters of the martyrs of resistance, and himself was affiliated with Hizb ut-Tahrir. So these people were in positions of influence over the police, which is why, obviously, when Hizb ut-Tahrir did that, when they said, rise up for jihad, the Met Police said, well, jihad has a number of meanings. These are the people they're getting their guidance from. So they launder ideas via Islamist groups, now prescribed, but some of them still not prescribed, like the Muslim Council of Britain, who have ties with the Muslim Brotherhood, according to a 2015 UK government report. But for some reason, unlike Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and all of the other sensible Arab countries who still haven't banned them, they launder their ideas through officials that appoint themselves as the representatives of community cohesion within government bodies. They're appointed there as a matter of law by the Equality Act. They shape policy, and then the Islamists basically get off scot-free.
The future looks bleak at the moment. I think things are going to get worse before they get better, unfortunately. Because the one constant at the moment seems to be it gets worse and worse. There is at least some hope in America of Trump draining the swamp. Here in Britain, we have to wait until 2029 until we might just get someone in power who might begin to drain our swamp here. There are a lot of Jews are saying, that they fear that it is going to go the way of, we are seeing the warning signs of what became Nazi Germany and the Holocaust. I don't think it's going to happen like that. In terms of the history repeating itself. I think we're going to see more of a repeat of the Hebron massacre, the 1929 Hebron massacre. But it's going to be a lot more widespread. It's going to be a lot more, it's going to be far more common, far more frequent. It's going to be, Arab mobs kicking off. It's going to be kind of, mobs of Muslims attacking Jews. The authorities doing little or nothing to stop it. I think those are the dark days we're looking at here in Europe and Canada particularly, and Australia as well. That's the future I dread. I don't have many hopes, and I have a lot of dreads, I have to say. All I can do is hope and pray for a better future. and not a future that's going exactly the way that Hamas planned and wanted, in which the world would reward baby killers, because the world doesn't care about dead Jewish children, apparently. Well, I say apparently, but there's no apparently about it. I know the world doesn't now. And I wish I didn't know. You know, my neighbour's right. I'm not an expert on the Middle East. I've never been there. Well, I mean, I've been to Dubai, but I've never been to Israel, and I've never been to the West Bank. I've not seen it firsthand. But I'm seeing my own country rot away. I'm seeing the war there being brought here by only one side in this. And I say enough of this shit. I am absolutely sure I don't want this shit in my country. So I'm absolutely sure that I'm going to take a stand. Anyway, this is Sadako24 signing out.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It means so much to see so many of you here, from the community and from our allies. Friends, we are coming together in troubled times to send a singular message to the government of this country and to the Prime Minister that they are actively harming the chances of us being able to bring the hostages home. The shameful rhetoric that has encouraged this action, some of which was heard unfortunately earlier on, but you, ladies and gentlemen, told them exactly what you think of them. Use that energy, that power. Tell them what the reality is. And let's listen to Hamas when they thank members of the international community for recognizing a so-called Palestinian state. This government that pretends to prize international law, look how readily it threw out of the window the Montevideo Convention, customary international law, to be able to pursue its agenda against the only Jewish state. Shame on them. Shame! Shame! But with your voices ringing out as they are today, 674 days after Hamas committed this brutal atrocities of the 7th of October, 674 days those hostages have remained in Hamas captivity. We say, let them go to Hamas. That is the message that this government and every government around the world that believes in human rights, justice, and wishes to combat internationally prescribed terrorist organizations, that is the message that they need to be shouting from the rooftops in words and in deed. So let them hear it. Let them go. Let them go! 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 And each and every one of you, in addition to coming here today, has the power to convey that message and letters to your members of parliament, in contributions to the media and conversations around the dinner table. Don't let Hamas get away with these victories through propaganda warfare and spreading blood libels against the Jewish state. Even if some members of the community have started to believe them, let them know how wrong they are. I was very privileged for Yom HaZikaron to be in Israel and to attend the service on ammunition here. A learned rabbi indicated that while the Jewish people may be the smallest nation in the world, they are the largest family. Never was that more strongly felt than on the 7th of October and the 674 days subsequently, when our family members have been kept in brutal Hamas captivity and tortured by their captors. So in the words of Moses to Pharaoh, Shalach et ami, let my people go.